Hello and welcome to Reading the Receipts, where we do a weekly update going through the docket of the ongoing legal battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. This all started because I kept being told you haven't read the documents, you haven't read the documents. So every week we come back to this, we go through the documents and we read them together. So very grateful to have you here, especially given that we moved the time to Sunday. So thank you for being with us. As always, we're going to start out with our legal disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not your lawyer. This is not legal advice. All of the allegations that we're going to cover today are just that. They're allegations. Nothing has been proven in court. Nothing that we say here should be taken as fact. And, this is all just opinion provided for entertainment value. So with that said, we have another really long docket this week. So I don't know that we'll go to 3.5 hours, but we might push to 2.5. So we'll see how quickly we can get through it. Some of the stuff I'm not going to cover that deeply because it's kind of much of a redo. And I'm not going to cover Blake Lively's motion to dismiss against Jed Wallace this week. I will hold that off till next week. There was just too much, so we're pushing that out. Hello to chat. Hey, Mousy Jinx, glad you're here early. It's good to see you. With that, we're going to jump right in. So let me know that you can see the screen. You can hear me, everything. And we are going to jump. I'm going to start out not talking about the docket right now. Credit here to Last Along over on Reddit because they found this that Steve Sarowitz actually has a number of media companies and media related companies that he funds and promotes. And there is another media company that is very Baha'i focused. And that kind of like that's what they're really about, is telling stories specifically about the Baha'i faith. I'm working with Baha'i filmmakers to make media called Companion Arts. And Last Along noticed this week that website had been updated. So the original website was just kind of like a placeholder, talking about we're building unity in a website, and that we're Companion Arts, a sister company of Wayfarer Studios, pioneer groundbreaking Baha'i-inspired media that promotes the oneness of humankind and upholds the nobility of every human being. From podcasts to feature films, from episodic series to social media, we seek to move hearts and inspire collective progress. Beautiful. Great sentiment. Well, they've updated into their full website now, and they have scrubbed all mention of Wayfarer, understandably. Now they're just pioneering groundbreaking media that promotes the oneness of humankind and upholds the nobility of human being. They scrubbed. It talks here about it's a media company. No mention of being a sister company to Wayfarer. And then they introduce, their filmmakers as part of it, but there's no connection to them. Now they do have some media they've made, and in particular, they have a documentary that says it was coming out in spring. So I guess it's out. I don't know where. Maybe they're still trying to find where they're distributing it, but it's called The Forbidden University. It's a story about the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education, an informal underground university in Iran where building and teaching people would be a crime for the members of the Baha'i faith. So interesting. Definitely, something I probably want to watch and look more about. They have a profile for Mr. Steve Sarowitz, and Steve Sarowitz is a founder and chairman of Paylocity. He's a director of Payscape, a UK payroll provider. And, it talks about the films he's involved in, such as Clouds and Will and Harper, Empire Waste, and Ezra. No mention of Wayfarer. Once again, Wayfarer has been scrubbed. It's interesting that he seems to be distancing himself, right? It used to be that obviously there was a connection to Wayfarer, and Wayfarer's history of having put out, strong media was kind of a good thing to be attached to, but clearly not so much anymore. And we wonder if this is a move of them slowly starting to distance themselves, especially given there's a news story, and I didn't link it. I should have brought it up here. There's a news story this week about, I think it was like last week, of Justin, feeling the emotional toll and financial toll again of all of this. And I wonder if they're starting to plant the seeds for why he will eventually drop and settle, because, it's not that he was in the wrong. It's just, it's all too much to him, and he just wants to walk away and get on with his life, kind of planting those seeds. So we're already seeing them kind of trying to walk away from all of this. Very excited to catch this live. It's a lovely stormy evening here in Norway. Ida, it is good to have you. I'm glad you're able to catch this live today. Perfect for going through some documents. I love a nice little stormy day, some rain. Good time for me to curl up with a book and read. And instead, you'll have just me going over legal documents. So maybe this is a way to cure insomnia. I don't know. All right. So let's go through. I forgot to bring up the docket. Let's go through the docket. I'm going to move around a little bit. So I know most of you are probably anticipating sanctions, right? That was the big news from this week. I'm going to go out of order a little bit this week. So one of the first things we got was the unsealing of the exhibits, the RFPs for the financial information. We talked about it last week. There wasn't really any big revelations that were hidden by the sealing. It was basically everything that was already in those documents and talked about. So they were asking for documents about net worth, documents about tax income or income and tax information, and also liquidation of assets. And so we've already got a ruling on that from Lyman of that. Hey, you have to hand over information about your net worth and income, but not necessarily tax returns and not your liquidation of assets. But yeah, wasn't anything big in that. Like I said, sanctions we will come to in a little bit, so hold that for a moment. The big thing I want to talk about first is the motion to compel for James Vituscka, because I think this is pretty much a big deal. So we're going to close this out. So James Vituscka is the Daily Mail journalist that is all throughout every single one of Justin Baldoni's complaints. He uses the conversation with James to really lay the groundwork for his complaint of defamation against Leslie Sloan. So obviously, Sloan has turned around and sent a request for production to James to ask him for the conversation between him and Wayfarer, to find out what was said about her, right? Sloan has kind of put forward in her motions to dismiss and her arguments that any of the comments from Vituscka saying that she has, defamed Blake Lively in any way would be responsible to James Vituscka. They're not proof that Sloan did anything. And so we need the context of that conversation, because most of us who've read that conversation where Vituscka says, I spoke to her a bunch and she never said anything about sexual harassment, seems to suggest that she never said anything about sexual harassment rather than the opposite. But we need the full context of that conversation to see. So that's exactly what Sloan's asked for Vituscka, and he has responded basically saying he's not going to provide any of the documentation, that it is outside of his outside of privilege, right? So it is attorney-client privilege, work product doctrine. He's boilerplate, the same as Wayfarer, that it's overly broad and burdensome to provide his conversation. He asks for all documentation concerning the film, and part of his objection is that this is so broad and burdensome because a search of the Daily Mail website for It Ends With Us from December to present returns over 2,000 hits, which is a bold argument you're going to make when this case is centralized around was there a media ran smear campaign about this or not, to say, look, there's just a boatload of news stories that we ran about this one film. It seems to kind of suggest that, yeah, maybe there was specific an unusual attention to this movie for some particular reason which we have not yet discovered. But in particular, Sloan's after the conversation of voice recordings and video between her and Vituscka that Vituscka then shared to Wayfarer. And again, he's gone in to say, look, it's overly broad and none of this exists. So you can't have it because, again, it's privileged. It's too burdensome for me to provide it, and it doesn't exist. None of this exists. He goes on to say all the persons that were party to a conversation or voice recording of the Sloan party that you made, again, says he doesn't have any information regarding that, so you can't have it. And then specifically, she's asking here for the conversation that is excerpted in paragraph 193 in Baldoni's complaint. And if you remember, I'm in the original NYT. We want the amended. There we go. Page 193 is where he talks about the Daily Mail reporter informed Nathan that Sloan had lied to portray Baldoni as the foe, and includes, this is a message from Vituscka to Wayfarer, including his screenshots with Sloan telling, all of this stuff. Now, she said the whole cast hates Justin. This has nothing to do with Blake. And now she's saying that Blake was sexually assaulted. Sloan's taking this to say, Vituscka saying that Sloan is saying Blake was sexually assaulted is referring to the CRD complaint, not to Sloan actually planting any information, and that this conversation happened after that, which Wayfarer have confirmed. They confirmed that this conversation was after December 20th. When it was is interesting, and I'll get to that in a second. So they're wanting that conversation. Given that Wayfarer put it in their complaint, they're using it. Seems fair game, right? Vituscka disagrees. He argues that it's privileged. He argues that it's privileged under reporter's privilege as well. Their ability to protect sources recognized by the First Amendment. He also reckons it says it's attorney-client privilege, work product protected in doctrine. And so he will not be producing documents responsive to this request. Again, she's asking for all conversations around that conversation, same response, and he will not be. He is literally just shutting this down and saying, no, you're not getting anything. This is insane, right? It is a key part, this conversation, of Wayfarer's complaint. There are only two real pieces of evidence that Wayfarer show for defamation. One is the conversations between Ryan Reynolds and WME, the two predator comments, right? And then this conversation. This is all they have. So if this conversation is privileged and not on the board, Wayfarer don't really have a defamation claim against anyone other than Ryan Reynolds. Their entire case gets tossed. They might with the New York Times, but they already have a separate complaint against the New York Times, and it's very likely that their motion to dismiss is going to survive. And so the only defamation claim they would have left is the predator comments from Ryan Reynolds, if this conversation's off the table. So why are they not including it, given that it is so critical and key to their entire complaint? Like I said, this conversation is in every single version of Wayfarer's complaint. So in their original complaint in the New York Times, against the New York Times specifically, they include this conversation. They include the screenshots of what Leslie had said to James Vituscka. They include this conversation here with James. And you can see James is on his own talking to Melissa Nathan. And then they bring in two people now. It says, so he's talking to Melissa Nathan and to Brian Friedman. You can see Brian Friedman's picture there. That's one of the actual kind of like, if you search for Brian Friedman, that's one of his pictures that comes up. And so, they're saying like, hey, can you give us anything with dates? Anything you have is helpful. He says, yep. Brian says, thanks, Melissa. Brian Friedman, I really appreciate it, James. He's introducing himself. This is where James tells them that, never once did she mention anything about sexual harassment. Here is the screenshot recording telling them that it would just be easier to scroll through and give them a video of their conversation. So Sloan's asked for a motion to compel, right? Arguing that, hey, this is some BS, right? That Vituscka is not producing these documents. Firstly, because, look, it is central to the case. They're arguing that, first off, that Sloan, they're arguing that she defamed Wayfarer and Baldoni, but they include this conversation with Vituscka, where Vituscka is telling them she didn't mention any allegations of sexual assault. Wayfarer are the ones who showed this. And she's saying, look, this is, of course, consistent with the fact that no one, including the Daily Mail, ever published an article accusing Baldoni of sexual assault in connection with the dispute. And that's true. There's only one, I think, and that's later, where they talk about the inappropriate touching and inappropriate kissing. So they never actually directly accuse him of sexual assault or use any of those words, which is consistent with Sloan never mentioning it. And I believe Sloan also didn't actually know at this point, which is wild. And I think when we get to the trial, if we get that far, the idea that even Lively's publicist didn't even know really about the extent of everything that had happened on the set of It Ends With Us is crazy, and definitely kind of disputes the idea that Wayfarer have that Lively was trying to use these allegations to, manipulate and extort and burn it out and go public with this, because like she had actually kept it very under wraps until the CRD complaint. Quick check over on chat. Yeah, Maxi Jinx, too bad he waived it by handing it over for Wayfarer's suit, which is what Sloan is about to argue here, is that the reporter's privilege doesn't apply here because, firstly, Vituscka himself waived this privilege by providing and disclosing the information about Sloan to Wayfarer, and that Wayfarer themselves waived their privilege by putting the information and conversation in their public complaint. So to turn around now and say that this is privileged information after you have voluntarily handed over the conversation and then put the conversation out on the internet, as part of these legal complaint, is crazy. And especially given, as again, like she talks about, it's central to their case. They have made this the foundational platform of their defamation claims. So to say that it's privileged and it's not discoverable is clearly at odds with that. Sophie R, glad I can join again. Good to see you, Sophie. Vituscka's cringe. He acts like a friend to Sloan, but totally knifes her in the back. I am very sure that he does the same to Nathan. I will be surprised if we don't find out that all of these people have been stabbing each other in the back all the time. And honestly, like, if this wasn't about sexual harassment and it wasn't about this giant smear campaign, which is incredibly devastating and so destructive to everybody's mental health, not just Lively, but also all of the other people who are involved in this case, I would find it entertaining. This would hit my vein for reality TV nonsense, right? The way that they're all stabbing each other. Unfortunately, like, any kind of joy from all of that is taken away by just how dangerous and destructive this is to people's real lives, and especially when we talk about like mental health. The kind of smear campaign that like Lively's been put under, that Colleen Hoover's been put under, all of these people, especially when you think about like Isabel Ferreira, it's tragic because, like, this is the sort of thing where somebody then no longer wants to be here anymore, and these people have made their entire career pushing this crap. So it's hard. Eleni says, better late than never for once. Letting like, hello from the UK. I'm here for the breakdown, but most importantly, the sass. We will let some sass sneak in here. I'm trying to be even, but like, yes, there's a lot of Brent that comes out sometimes. Junk Farm says it's super weird for a publicist to tell a reporter there's sexual harassment happening in a movie her client is currently working on. Yeah, and again, even if that were the case, right? Like, this is very much a legal thing. There's legal liability and exposure. It's not something you just throw out there. Millie Bella says, hi, I'm late. Very happy to catch up again live. I'll try to catch up in 2 times. Well, glad you are here. And Jug Farm says, her not saying anything proves less than nothing. Yeah. Again, it actually undermines all of Wayfarer's case, because again, like, if they're arguing that she for a year and a half, 2 years was using these threats over them to gain privileges and extort them, why did she never mention it, right? Why was she, even the people close to her had no idea? It's strange. Anyway, so she also argues, look, it's also not news gathering, right? The privilege is all about gathering news and protecting sources. It does not protect Vituscka providing information to somebody else, and especially providing them for the purposes of litigation, which is what he was doing, providing them with evidence and information and parts of the conversation, which is why Brian Friedman was involved, rather than seeking information from the Wayfarer parties and their counsel for reporting news. Vituscka's conversations with Nathan and Friedman, to the extent it do not apply to those conversations, to the extent he was supplying them with information to be included in a complaint rather than gathering information for them to be included in an article, seems fairly obvious. Of course, the reporter's privilege does not apply to all of Vituscka's conversations simply because he happens to be a journalist. Yeah, and it certainly does not apply to his statements pictured in the amended complaint, which never appeared in a Daily Mail article and instead appear only in the pleadings against the Sloan parties. Again, another point of the information they're trying to use was never public, right? So how can it be her defaming or putting out here if it was never used in an article? Yeah, so let's go see. The statements of the Wayfarer parties attribute to Vituscka in their complaints are therefore the sole basis for their claims against the sole parties. We kind of covered this. It is foundational to their claims of defamation. So if these conversations are not part of it, there's really nothing else they have. And they also go on to say that, look, if they can't have those conversations, then they cannot defend themselves without the discovery process needed to understand the statements. It's not fair that Wayfarer get to use them if they're not discoverable, because they cannot reasonably build a defense around them without knowing the scope of those conversations. Again, fairly standard. Vituscka does also argue that, look, these are available from another source. We had this last week with the subpoenas against Edgeworth and Venable, right? That in in short, you're supposed to ask for this information from the parties in the case before going to a third party. So the conversations between Vituscka and Nathan and Friedman are available from Nathan and Friedman. So really, Sloan should be asking for them. But she kind of makes the point of, look, even if they actually knew what Vituscka meant when he said that Blake was sexually assaulted, their testimony is wholly speculative. Moreover, they're in an adversarial position and therefore cannot serve as a reliable source for the information sought. They're calling out and saying, look, we don't believe that they will give us the full and open copy of those text messages, which, as I've talked about, a couple of times now, given that those text messages are edited in his complaint, that is a fair claim to make about them. I don't think I have that picture handy. You're just gonna have to take my word for that. I think most of you who follow me have seen me talk about this stuff. Oh, there we go. These are the conversations that are edited in his complaint, right? So there's two pieces where I think originally in the New York Times, in the first complaint against the New York Times, he shows this conversation between Leslie and James, and there's this response from James where he says, so they want to run something based on this reporting, after she says, I'm telling you he's a liar. And then in his, I think it's in his timeline, that response from James is gone entirely. They have edited out. Now, either he deleted that text message and then showed them another copy of the screenshot, or they edited the screenshot. Either way, that is not a complete conversation that is in his timeline. They also do it again in the actual New York Times complaint itself. I think I've shown you this probably endlessly, but we're doing it one more time. Is it before 64? I know it was around 60, right? I am in the right one. 61. I thought it was around 60. Am I wrong? Where's the conversation? Y'all know? This is the Baldoni's complaint versus New York Times. It's around here somewhere. I thought, hey, here it is. I was a little late, a little further along. And this whole conversation is them, showing this continued conversation. She was kind of off promoting as if it was Bobby. You can see here, she was kind of off promoting as Bobby. And it kind of continues down the whole thing, top to bottom. But you can see here, it says, please make it turn around. I know you're friends with Melissa. And before that, he says to her, it will all turn around. You know better than anyone how to flip the script. And says, I know you, please make it turn around. I know you were friends with Melissa. Yeah, we are. And then it says, instead, they're liking City. Good for you. I know you're friends with Melissa. Yeah, we are. So this conversation as well has also been changed and manipulated between these two screenshots. So again, I think Sloan's right here. Like they've been editing their screenshots. They're not reliable. We know that they've been editing their screenshots. She also points out that Vituscka is scheduled to sit for a deposition on June 4th and is likely going to put in the same privilege. So we need the court to intervene to compel him to, respond. Vituscka has filed for an extension to respond, and the judge has granted it. And I forget what the extension is to. I think it's like the end of next week. And that's fine because I think he has like 2 or 3 days and made the excuse, like the point of, hey, I'm not involved in this case. I've only just got notified of this being filed against me. So I need extra time to prepare. And the judge was like, yeah, sure. Not a problem. So that was the big kind of reveal is that this ongoing saga of not being able to get any of the evidence that even Wayfarer themselves are relying on has just continued and ongoing. Yeah. So let's go quickly to chat. The moment I saw JB's text to Blake Lively, but especially Ryan Reynolds, cannot but feel like he's sorry it ends with us his way into the inner circles and doors, opening the upper elite of Hollywood. Yeah, and I think he was very excited of that, right? He was going to connect into a lot of powerful people. And this is also like in that Khaleesi text, right? This so-called threat where she's like offering, I'm connected to very powerful people and they protect my friends. And I want you to be part of that. You will be a friend. He had that opportunity and blew it. Also, from all the documents in his timeline, it seems to me he wasn't producing, directing a film and running a set of this magnitude. That's definitely what it feels like. And I think this is an opportunity where you can learn, right? If this is your first time running a big set and you have a proven big Hollywood movie star who's worked with some big directors before, and they have some advice on how to run the set and how to make sure people are feeling safe, take that advice, right? Learn, grow. That insecurity of seeing any criticism as complaints and a questioning of your ego and your manhood. I mean, this is foundational to everything Baldoni's platform was supposedly about, but shows he never learned a lick of it. Sophie says he definitely does not have the character for a director who can't set boundaries or tell people how he really feels. Yeah, he seems very like that. That again seems to be like a consistent story in his complaint is he feels one way, but then talks in a completely different way. You can see them backbiting and talking about Blake Lively taking too much control and having too much input and to set firm boundaries. And then he's like, yeah, no, it's great. I want all of it. Like, you know, provide changes to the script. That sounds great. Like, dude, like be consistent. He may as well have, Elle says, he may as well have, but definitely small budget indie productions that don't include social issues that heavy. Yeah, we just talked about that on Threads last night. This was also the same problem with 5 Feet Apart as well. Putting aside the whole issue with Travis Flores and him, you know, allegedly stealing the script and leaving Travis's family without any answers and refusing to talk to them, and poor Travis being told by Friedman to drop his case or Baldoni would financially and physically ruin him. Putting aside all of that, that film also had a ton of backlash for having a tone-deaf marketing. And, you know, I don't know how that is Blake Lively's fault, but I am very sure that Wayfarer will find some way to blame Blake Lively for that as well. All right. The other big kind of reveal this week was back in February. We get this letter from Blake Lively's lawyers where they talked about that a third-party neutral investigator was investigating the claims of sexual harassment and wanted to interview Miss Lively, and that they had been hired by Wayfarer to do this. And Lively's lawyers came back and said, basically, like, oh, hell no, right? Like, this is 2 years too late. Because, you know, it's not just an investigation. It needs to be one that is prompt, thorough, and effective. Wayfarer's investigation is none of these. It's been filed 2 years after her first complaint in May 2023. It needs to be thorough, but, you know, they're only trying to investigate things from the Wayfarer side and only talking to, like, Wayfarer current employees. They have no authority to compel anyone to speak, and they're relying on, you know, Wayfarer to kind of lead the investigation. So it's not going to be thorough. And then they also talked about it's not going to be effective because basically they're just going to provide these recommendations to Wayfarer, but it's up to Wayfarer what they want to do. So if they want to bury the answers to this and never reveal to the public that there was all of this stuff, that could happen. They also talk about its objectivity, right? That Wayfarer and its counsel have been just, you know, absolutely lighting up Lively and her husband throughout the case in the public, and kind of going after her, talking about how they want to destroy her, that all of her allegations are fake, and all of this stuff. So they've already made their minds up. This is not an impartial third-party investigation. Wayfarer themselves have already decided the outcome. This is being backfilled essentially to give them coverage and a reason to validate that. I thought there was also in here the notion that the Wayfarer's counsel was present. I don't remember where I saw that. I know it's discussed later. I just thought it was in this one. So give me 1 second when we just see if we can find that. I don't think so. It's not. Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, on the issue of Wayfarer's counsel, he stated that any represented party would be permitted to have counsel. We know that all the material Wayfarer party witnesses are represented by Brian Friedman, who's repeatedly tagged them, and he's going to be present. No interview in which Friedman is present could be considered neutral, right? They're arguing that, like, he's going to be there in those interviews. So anyway, apparently this has continued. The investigation kind of came back to basically say, yeah, we're just going to carry on doing whatever we're going to do. We don't care. So they came back and they say that, you know, look, even if Wayfarer failed to investigate Lively's prior complaints, Wayfarer still must investigate subsequently filed complaints. And they argue that we are prompt because we're in response to the CRD complaint that was filed in December, and we started the investigation in January. So, you know, look, you're saying that there are allegations that are surfaced 2 years ago, but their scope of our investigation includes whether she'd filed earlier complaints and whether Wayfarer failed to investigate those. But we're in response specifically to the CRD complaint. So they're trying to get around this by saying, you know, we are prompt. Secondly, they talk about, look, employees are typically required to cooperate per company policy, but external witnesses may choose whether to participate. We can't force anybody to do it, but we can force the Wayfarer employees to do it. Now, I get why they're saying this, right? Like, it's showing about the limit of their power, but this doesn't help with this sense of impartiality when you're like, look, we can coerce employees who are involved into being involved in with the investigation. They talk about, look, this is just a limitation of ours process being outside of the legal fact finding, that we can't force anybody, and that's not how a neutral workplace investigation operates. They talk about, yes, Wayfarer's counsel is present, but other people are allowed to have counsel if they want. But again, if Brian Friedman's representing Wayfarer, right, and all of the parties in this case, and they're bringing in Wayfarer employees, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get another counsel present who is going to protect your interests above Wayfarer, right? You're going to get Brian Friedman, who's going to put Wayfarer first, not your own interests. So again, it really undermines this idea that this is an independent, impartial investigation. But they do reiterate that, look, we do not permit counsel's presence to compromise the findings of our fairness and allow counsel to interfere with the integrity of the investigation. But again, how much we know about that, we don't know. They go on to then talk about, like, look, the nature of the investigation itself is privileged, and that privilege remains with the employer, Wayfarer. That all of the material we're providing is privileged material handed over to them, and they get to decide what to do with that. And so, again, they try to ask if Lively's going to participate. Lively's team respond one more time to say, yes, look, you are still going and you are still talking to witnesses. So they immediately tell them to cease and desist. You're actively talking to witnesses who are in an active litigation matter, some of whom are represented by counsel, and you fail to disclose that your supposedly neutral investigation is bought and paid for by Wayfarer. Even worse, you fail to disclose that in correspondence, you are acting as Wayfarer's lawyers, and as such will be the sole party Wayfarer will be the sole party that has access to the information that witnesses may be providing. You informed us that, you're taking the position this investigation is confidential and privileged, which means that although Wayfarer will have access to your investigation notes, documents, and recordings and audio recordings of witnesses, neither Lively nor third-party witnesses with whom you meet will have such access unless Wayfarer chooses to waive the privilege. So imagine you're a third party, you get interviewed by this, you say something, right? You're not under oath. You then later are called into court and you say something else, and Wayfarer say, well, you say this in the investigation. You will not have copy of what you said in the investigation to prove whether Wayfarer are even telling the truth or not. They will be the only ones that get to control that evidence. This is hugely improper and a huge liability, especially for those third-party witnesses that they interview, because they will not have access to the material and evidence that they are providing, even to be able to defend themselves. So they talk about this. Based on your correspondence, potential witnesses will surely not understand that they're being interviewed by Wayfarer's lawyers, who are investigating at Wayfarer's instruction, providing work product to Wayfarer to use in whatever way Wayfarer sees fit. And they point out that unlike your investigation under trial, they will be testifying under oath. And so there may be inconsistencies there, right? So they kind of continue to kind of go on to all of this. They talk about their scope, and again, they're hammering home the point that they're going off basically what Wayfarer provides to you. Wayfarer appears to be attempting to ascertain how witnesses will testify in a closed environment without affording Lively or anyone else the examination of those witnesses, so that they can then prepare their case against that. It's definitely not neutral because of, the public statements of the client you're working on. Again, they bring up the point of, what then is the purpose of the discovery or investigation other than to duly influence witnesses and then run the discovery process? Wayfarer have already kind of made up their mind about this. They talk about that Wayfarer themselves have repeatedly stated as part of this litigation, there was no legal liability for them to investigate these claims of sexual harassment. They have said that them signing the protections for return to production was, as far as they were concerned, the end of the matter, and they were not under any legal obligation to investigate anything. So therefore, Lively cannot sue them for failing to investigate sexual harassment because there was no legal liability there. So now how can they turn around and say, well, we're doing an illegal investigation, an investigation that we're legally obligated to do? kind of contradicts. And so again, the idea then no one would possibly believe that Wayfarer is going to disclose a finding that Lively's allegations are substantiated, given that doing so would require Wayfarer to not only dismiss its nearly $1 billion of litigations against Lively, but be subject to fee shifting, treble, and punitive damages for bringing meritless claims against her. Again, Wayfarer have already decided to bring counterclaims against her before this investigation has come through. So if the investigation does find that Wayfarer are legally liable and there was valid claims of sexual harassment, it makes everything they've said in that complaint completely untrue, and that they had no evidence to do so, and that the claims are completely meritless, which is a huge problem. So again, I don't think anybody believes that this is a fair investigation, given that that's the pressure these people are under. They point out that the purpose of this exercise is for Wayfarer to bury any unhelpful findings under attorney-client privilege, publicly release any findings Wayfarer deems useful, and perhaps most importantly, use any and all information obtained from witnesses to its advantage as much as possible in the litigation. They point out all of Brian Friedman's public statements on this, and then continue to say that we expect you to cease and desist until we get, this in front of the court. They're arguing that, look, they've put this investigation at issue, and so we're going to ask for the court and say, look, we want you to stop talking to any witnesses until we've raised this issue with the court. If you fail to do so, we will promptly raise the foregoing with the court and seek all available sanctions against you. They respond one more time. They argue that we are not litigation counsel to Wayfarer, do not operate under any litigation or public relations strategy, and our work is free from external pressures, including those arising from pending litigation. So they seem to be pushing back against Lively's argument that they're doing this in preparation for pending litigation. Now, I don't know how that works to work product and attorney-client privilege. I don't think it completely destroys it, because I still think having an independent investigation into sexual harassment claims would still be work product, I think, but I don't know as a layman. But it would seem to at least severely undermine what Wayfarer are about to say next. And again, they just kind of reiterate their piece again, and to say, look, even if Wayfarer do waive attorney-client privilege, that doesn't mean that they're compelled the production of their material. So it puts them in this weird position that they're saying that Wayfarer have the ability to say that this is privileged. They can release pieces of it and say that privilege doesn't work, but that doesn't then mean that they're compelled to produce all of the work product that is involved in this. So again, it seems to prove Lively's point that Wayfarer just want to release select pieces of this that make them look good while hiding the pieces that don't. So Lively has filed a motion to compel to the judge to say, hey, we need them to hand over everything they've been doing right now. They need to hand over all the witnesses they've talked to, any documentation about this, and we have served them with a subpoena for that end. They talk about the investigation as a disingenuous charade, and that, if her complaints were promptly required, investigated as law required, they would have been spared. Lively would have been spared the retaliatory smear campaign. Instead, Wayfarer waited years to initiate the investigation, and Wayfarer had already forcefully denied Lively's allegations and sued her and several others for $400 million for making the very same allegations they are now neutrally investigating. They also then go on to say that this also undermines a lot of Friedman's argument, that Friedman incorrectly asserted that his obligation to investigate or take corrective action was mooted by the party's execution of the return to production protections in January. Setting aside the legal fallacy, Friedman's position is a death knell for any argument that this is a legitimate neutral workplace investigation consistent with Wayfarer's legal obligations. According to Friedman, there were no such obligations. So they're trying to have it both ways, right? They're trying to argue that they're not legally liable as far as Lively's case is concerned, because that would expose them to that legal liability, but at the same time saying they have to do this investigation because they are legally liable, which seems inconsistent. Again, they point out that Wayfarer are not permitted to wield the attorney-client shield privilege as a sword and a shield, invoking the privilege for now to shield the information, but then waive it later due to some unknown future date if the investigation yields a result that Wayfarer likes, which will no doubt publicly release with such fanfare. Because, let's be honest, has there been anything that Wayfarer have not done so to? The motive is clear. Wayfarer hopes to conduct a shadow fact discovery under the pretext of attorney investigation to prevent Lively from obtaining critical information is too late. Wayfarer's refusal to confirm its position on the attorney-client privilege is improper. Moreover, regardless of whether Wayfarer intends to rely on the investigation at trial, its choice to initiate the investigation in the middle of contentious litigation years after the events at issue rose means that it must disclose the underlying materials now during discovery. So they kind of give you, a rundown of everything that we've just kind of talked about. They talk about how the materials are highly irrelevant. Wayfarer is not permitted to assert blanket objections and categorically withhold documents on attorney-client privilege without identifying the specific materials being held. Oh, forgot to mention. So as part of that, they do actually, I guess, is it in M2? Where is it? Oh my gosh. I thought it was in this exhibit. I forget which one it is. Did I get the right ones? I did. I'll have to go look in a minute. They do actually provide a log, and it might be in Wayfarer's objection. Is it in Wayfarer's objection? No, it's not. I'll go find it. They do actually provide a log of the information. I'm gonna have to go find that in a second. And it's real basic. It's real basic. But they're saying, yes, they've got to actually be able to identify what the material is they're trying to hold. They haven't come close to meeting the burden to show that it applies. And they've failed to explain how witness notes, interview recordings, or communications with third-party witnesses are privileged. It does not even confirm that the investigation are rendering legal advice rather than simply a neutral fact-finding investigation, as they've repeatedly suggested. And this is a point of contention, right? The investigation is saying we're just a neutral fact-finding investigation. Wayfarer is saying we can't give you anything because they're providing legal advice. So which is it? Wayfarer then objected to all of this, kind of coming in and saying, look, the investigation is ongoing. It's improper to kind of disclose or put out any of this information while it's ongoing because doing so would impact the ongoing investigation, right? If you know that your materials are going to be provided to Lively, maybe that changes your response. And so that's what they're arguing in here, is that doing so would impact the ability for witnesses to be impartial and turn it over. It says it's not only invasive and unprecedented, it seeks to undermine the investigative process, especially given the high-profile nature of this litigation. Premature disclosure of the requested materials would risk chilling witness candor, distorting the fact-gathering process. They've also say they have not yet asserted whether they will or will not waive the attorney-client privilege because it doesn't have any documents from the investigation. So they're saying, look, we can't even comply with the subpoena at this point because we don't have any information from the investigation. So how can we share anything with you when, we don't have that? Which is interesting. I guess, I don't know where, I'm trying to find where this log of privilege is, because it's somewhere in all of this. Oh, it's in the final letter. There we go. Found it. And so they're saying we don't have any documents, right? So, that's another reason why we can't comply with this, is because we don't have any documents in this. So they filed this. Within the next day, Lively then files another letter. Now, ordinarily, I believe, again, we're getting into how much a layman understands law. So if there's the lawyers that are in chat, you feel free to correct me on what I get wrong. But in a motion to compel, they file their motion to compel. The opposition has a side to give their piece, and then it's done, right? That is done, and then it's up to the judge to decide. Lively wants to continue going. She's saying, hey, we've got more information. So they file a motion to file a letter because at this point it's outside of normal procedure. So to continue that back and forth conversation on the motion to compel, they have to ask permission to say, hey, can we keep arguing this, basically? And so they filed a letter to say, hey, look, less than 24 hours after Wayfarer filed its opposition, Wayfarer's investigators provided correspondence that directly undermined the positions asserted by Wayfarers in its opposition with regard to the production and application of the attorney-client privilege to materials. So they're saying, hey, can we file a letter so that we can, share this information with you and kind of there's more to this discussion that needs to be said. When I put this on Threads, I looked at this page and then went off. I did not see that there was like 9 pages and the actual letter was included in this. So I kind of missed this. So anyway, They actually also included the letter that they wanted to file, which I believe is procedure. So I should have known that the letter would be attached. But it's been a busy week, hence why we're doing it on Sunday. So anyway, the letter says, look, in an email, the investigators reiterated their refusal to produce the investigation materials invoking Wayfarer's client attorney privilege and encouraged Wayfarer to resolve the issue. Meanwhile, right, as we've seen in the letter from Wayfarer, from Wayfarer, they're saying it's on the investigated materials. In other words, Wayfarer and the investigators are each refusing to produce the relevant and responsive materials. So they're saying, look, even outside the scope of the attorney-client privilege, there is material here that is relevant and responsive that they can provide that is not protected by that. And each of them are saying, we're not going to provide that. You need to go ask the other one. So essentially, it says there, they've created a perfect trap to prevent Lively from obtaining information to her claims. Because they're both saying, we're not going to provide it. You need to go to the other person. But as part of it, they attach a letter from them. I'm not going to go through the letter, but they do provide a privilege log. I don't know if I still have. Let me see if I've still got the Edgeworth. Is it from last week, the Edgeworth stuff? Because it looks very different. It looks very different than the Edgeworth one, I think. Edgeworth subpoena. I think it might be this one. See how good my memory is. Yeah. Okay, look at that. So here's a privilege log from Jones Works. I give you this because for those of us who are not in law, it looks different, right? The participants are named, the dates of the material are extensively in here, and the actual information in here contains details about the correspondence and why it's privileged, right? There's information in here to show that we have gone through them, we've looked specifically, we can describe the type of material, here's the dates of that material covers, and here are the people involved. Now look at the one that was provided by the investigators. There's no date range. We have no idea when these conversations happened. Various documents, we're told, are privileged, involving various third-party witnesses. It's just documents generated at the request of investigators relating to witness interviews. Well, we don't know. So Lively's also pointed out that they've sent us this, but this is wholly inappropriate. This does not give any kind of the level of detail that is needed to assert privilege and to say that we've gone through and we know what specifically these documents are. This is incredibly vague, and probably deliberately so. So they talk about that and they bring it up. In the same correspondence, the investigators provided to Wayfarer and Lively a purported privilege log, which provides 6 broad categories of documents, including various documents with various third-party witnesses. As grounds for withholding, the investigators cite Wayfarer's attorney-client privilege, the work product privilege, and the investigator's work product, without providing any further information. The investigator log, however, does not include a single date or identify any individual that sent, received, or created the withheld documents and communications. It's insufficient wholly to enable Lively or this court to evaluate whether attorney-client privilege or any other protection may apply. Wayfarer clearly has some documents on the investigator's log, which appear to be directed to or provided by the investigators, and is withholding them for a reason it has not made clear. Further, as the client Wayfarer has possession, custody, or control of the investigator's documents as a matter of law. Wayfarer has even attempted to effectively assert privileges to the investigated materials, and its privilege log does nothing to establish that such a privilege exists as to any of the documents. On the contrary, Wayfarer said in opposition, it takes no position on the investigator's assertion of Wayfarer's alleged privilege to the documents, because Wayfarer takes no position on the privilege and failed to set forth any preliminary facts establishing that a single investigation document is privileged, while the investigators in turn also failed to do the same. They've given the court no basis to find that any of the documents are privileged. So they're saying here that, look, this is also contrary to what they claim. They're very clearly listed here that they are involved in various correspondence. Wayfarer claimed they have no documentation and nothing has been provided to them by the investigation. That's clearly in contradiction to the investigation themselves, who say that, yeah, we provided Wayfarer with a bunch of investigative communications with Wayfarer regarding the status of the investigation, additional questions. So Wayfarer are straight up lying again about information that they have. And again, like the reason I wanted to kind of cover these together was because of the James Vituscka stuff. You can see how much there's so much obstruction on the Wayfarer side to provide anything. And that has got to be incredibly frustrating and difficult as we're going through litigating this. And it is why then we move on to what comes next, which is what you're probably all waiting for. So I'm going to jump to chat first. Oh my gosh, you've been busy. Jack says, sounds like they're getting more access to potential witness. Whole thing seems super skeezy. It is. I do think Wayfarer make the point of, look, I think our investigators make the point that they're allowed to conduct an investigation while litigation is ongoing, and just because there's litigation doesn't prevent their legal liability to do an investigation, which I can see, but I don't know how that would normally progress, right? Like, if we take this as legit, that, like, let's say that Wayfarer didn't know about the sexual harassment until Lively's CRD complaint, they then would have to do an investigation. How would that work alongside legal litigation? And like you said, the potential here to tamper with witnesses. It seems like there should be a process. It seems like this is something that should have been already worked out. I don't know that this is the process. This feels wrong. Ida says, we're going to go talk to all the potential witnesses and do some witness tampering, but like, it's fine. We have our lawyer there. Yeah. Wildest thing to say, like, yeah, well, Brian Friedman's going to be there. Like, the same Brian Friedman that leaked the CRD complaint to TMZ likely leaked the subpoena to the Daily Mail, though we don't know that, right? This, again, allegedly, right? We don't know who leaked the subpoena to the Daily Mail, but it seems very unlikely to have been Jones or JonesWorks or anybody on that side. Yeah, he's the one that's going to do. Oh, that's the other thing. I forgot. I was going to bring this up. Yeah, especially given, because I can do it in the context of this, that Brian Friedman has also been continuing to leak to the press. Did I not? I thought I put yeah, I did. I thought I put the screenshot in here. Billy Bush this week was also live and had a new text message that nobody else has seen so far. It's not in any of the complaints. The pieces of it are the whole "we're going to war, I feel so alive" is in JonesWorks' complaint against Abel. Same with the going out of Jed Wallace with a bang. This whole text message, though, is a new screenshot that Billy Bush had. Billy Bush is, closely associated with Friedman. You know, Friedman's been on TMZ a bunch. He's been on Hot Mics with Billy Bush as well. So like they're close. So this is very likely from them. It's also got the same formatting and style that is throughout the timeline of Baldoni's. So like it's pretty likely that it came from Baldoni's camp. But what's interesting is, you know, they're kind of making this, reframing this as about the statement from Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, you know, issuing the public statement that mistakes were made. And so they're saying any word on a statement, a big fuck you, no, thank God, we are going to war, I feel so alive. So, you know, she's talking about like, we're excited to go against Blake Lively, which again completely undermines everything in their complaint where they talk about, well, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds threatened us and they said the gloves were going to come off and this is also unfair to Wayfarer, when they're here gloating about hiring Brian Friedman. And because the other thing is, when the statement first comes out, that's when Melissa Nathan talks about like he needs a lawyer. Let me show you that. I've got it in here, right? Like I got everything. I don't know it's in here, so let me just bring up timeline. It's like August 12th, I think. Gosh, I know all of this stuff by my hand. Yeah, there it is. Look at this. This has been my hyperfixation. I love that, like, some of you are calling me out on social media and you're like, can you tell me where? Yeah, I can tell you where. So when they put out the request that, you know, Baldoni and Heath give out the statement, you know, she says here, can he please get a lawyer? He needs one. He's got one, but he needs a litigator. Brian Freeman's waiting and will take on WME. And that was on the 12th. And so, you know, this screenshot from Billy Bush is the next day, where they're talking about any word on giving a statement. No, we're going to war. We're going after them. We're going to go take them to Gora. Like, you are not the victims here. And she talks here specifically mentioning Brian Freeman. He's in mediation, by the way. I asked for his assistant. Okay, copy. So they're gloating. They're gloating about actively, you know, litigating and going after Blake Lively over all of this. So definitely changes their story. But my point being, again, Brian Friedman still leaking to the press. Or at least Melissa Nathan or somebody on Baldoni's side, I should say. We don't know that it's Brian Friedman, right? But somebody in Baldoni's camp is still leaking this stuff to the press to talk about. Which is wild when you're then turning around saying everybody's got a motion to compel against you to get evidence from you because you're not giving anybody any evidence. But you are giving Billy Bush evidence, but refusing to give any in court. This is wild. This is craziness. I still don't get why Abel doesn't got her own counsel. Abel has text dissing her client. Again, I don't know either. I mean, this is wild to me that she hasn't. I can only imagine that the issue is money right now, right? Is that Abel does not have the funds to be able to litigate a year-long campaign. You know, it's funny. I'm not going to cover Abel's motion to dismiss. Abel's response to the motion to dismiss that deeply. We're going to get to that towards the end. But in there, they talk about, her being, poor on her mediocre salary or whatever. And like, we already know that she was being paid like 120, I think it was 6 figures, which is, a decent salary, but it's definitely still like not, I don't have lawyer money. Like I don't have, $500,000, $1 million to then litigate this for the next year. So she's unfortunately just going to have to settle to Freeman until that money runs out. I believe he's going to throw her under the bus eventually. Yup. I mean, like if you look at the episode I did talking about the Bravo stuff with Brian Friedman, I mean, that's what he's consistently done to all of the Bravo stars that he's kind of represented, is they all get thrown under the bus as soon as it is convenient for him. I think it's inappropriate for Brian Friedman to be representing just about every party for this shady even, says Jack's Revenge. Yeah, there was also mention in that hearing in February, I can talk about because they have the transcript. They talk about in there, Brian Friedman additionally may be representing other people so long as they sign the conflict of interest waiver. So again, legally, I don't know, the whole process, but it seems that part of like having Brian Friedman represent so many people is that they're signing some sort of waiver about conflict of interests. Essentially that, probably that, it clears him of, hey, if I'm representing Wayfarer and it, causes harm to you or something, like there's some sort of prioritization around the conflict of interest there. That would terrify me. Signing something with my lawyer where I was waiving away conflict of interest in some format. We don't know what that waiver is. That might be completely normal. It's again, if the litigators in chat want to tell me about that, but that sounds terrifying to me. Having a legal representative that you sign any sort of waiver about conflict of interest over is crazy to me. I guess I could also technically be a conflict of interest of the party being represented to something else. I don't know. But yeah, I would be interested to know more about that and what exactly Abel has signed away. The independent research is used for Wayfarer's own case and testimony and nothing else, says Sophie. As a layperson, it's weird that they asked for a page reply and then already added the reply. Ask for a page reply and then already added the reply. I'm not sure what that means, Sophie. Is there... Yeah, would you be able to explain that for me? And maybe everybody else understands it. I'm just missing that. Apologize. Obi-Wan Kenobi says, why are they researching something they claim never happened and then there was never a complaint lodged about? So they have to, right? And so this is one of the key things I think people talk about when they misunderstand sexual harassment or claims in the workplace. And it's interesting because I have just gone through the training again this week. And it was interesting to me to go through the training again this week. Knowing this case, right? Because they specifically call out and for our training, gotta be careful what I say here, but our training, the training I did, let me say this, the training I have done both in the past, the training I've done in the past has often been handled by HR platforms, right? There's a number of them. If you're an employer, you don't have a HR department, you can just get a platform and go through it. The HR platforms themselves, pretty good. Have standard, training for this stuff. And they talk about, hey, what kind of behavior? Well, it's inappropriate comments. It's sharing imagery that is nude or explicit. It is everything that is in this case. And I have seen over the last 6 months, so many people talk about, well, is this really sexual harassment? And the answer is, yeah. For all of us that are in people management and do this training regularly and have to take it seriously, yeah, it is. And we know it is. Whenever claims are made, it does not need to be a formal complaint. It just needs to be somebody talking about being uncomfortable or talking about behaviors or actions that made them feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. And that needs to be something that action is taken on. Now, it does not necessarily mean you have to run to the whole gamut of doing a third-party investigation and pulling it out. But legally, there needs to be some sort of log that these complaints were logged, that they were investigated, even by the people managers themselves, and that there was some sort of action taken. And that action taken could be, we don't find that it was egregious enough. We don't find that it was pervasive enough. We talked to the person and they said a completely different understanding of the story. Like, these are all like fine. You don't have to go to the point of like, oh, it's a full investigation, do all this stuff. But there needs to be something. So it's very strange for them to say the very mention of the CRD complaint has made us investigate this. But the January 4th meeting, did I talk about that? I think I missed that in going through all of this. Did I talk about the Jan 4th? I thought I did in this, but the Jan 4th meeting, they talk about, well, she presented this list, this laundry list. Oh, I did miss it. I was going to talk about it here, so let me just jump to that right now. Lively's amended complaint 47 was what I was going to talk about. Oh, this is Baldoni's complaint. Amended? Blake Lively amended complaint. What was I going to talk about for this? Page 47. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is the piece I forgot to talk about the litigation. Sorry, we're going sidetracking. We're going to go down a rabbit hole because I forgot to mention this. Here's the really wild thing about the investigation. So we had this document back in I think now, right? This was when she did it, when she filed her amended complaint in February was when we first learned about it. I think there was a letter before that in the court, like late January. No, it must have been this because it says the letter was on January 31st. Anyway, they mentioned it in Lively's amended complaint, right? There was this litigation. They then create the investigation council. They get contacted by them and they want to have a call with Lively. Lively's did a call with them and it's all attached, right? They kind of do all of this stuff. Wayfarer, in their answers to this, where are we? Here we go. So that they have no information about it. In their answers, they said, don't know anything about that. Don't know about no third-party complaint. No third-party investigation. And I talked about it at the time. Like, it was really weird. When I put together the spreadsheet and talked about like some of the answers in there, I'd mentioned that this is strange because they denied doing it. Now, of course, they're admitting that, yes, they have hired this investigation and it's going on. But then how can they then also say in their answers they don't know any information about these allegations? It's crazy to me. I mean, there's so many of these where they've answered and said, oh, we don't know anything about that. But clearly somebody does, like the whole Jed Wallace thing, right? Everybody's saying we have no clue who hired Jed Wallace. Well, somebody did because you were working with him and you were talking to him and he's in your text message. So somebody knows who hired him. So yeah, it's crazy once we get to analyze some of those answers and stuff. But yes, I forgot to mention. But going back to, the claims that like, yeah, they talked about that. They talked about, do I keep closing it? I guess I do. I don't keep closing the timeline. So, like the timeline, the big kind of one is, yes, we have the January 4th meeting. We have the November 17th, 17 protections to return to work. But June 1st, right, we have Lively requested a meeting with Baldoni, shared a series of grievances, including the sexy comment, including the video, all of this stuff. So, I mean, like, they knew there were complaints on June 1st. And then we've also got the conversation where Sony told Wayfarer about Baldoni's sexy comment, that he's showing the post-birth home video. This idea that the CRD complaint is the first time they learned is not true by their own admission. So I don't know how they get to it. Yeah. So, so I'm going to skip through. Let's see. We don't know, but if I bought a new Civ, I'd name it Brian Friedman Says Obi-Wan Kenobi about the leaks. That's pretty good. I will call them Friedmans now in my house. You got the Friedman? I need to drain the pasta. I mean, the answer just for an approval for reply and then already replied to reply seems a bit presumptuous. Okay, I thought that's what you were meaning, Sophie, so I just want to check. So this goes back to Lively asking permission for filing the letter. Why are they filing the letter and then including the letter? And so the answer is, so in order to like get the permission from the judge, they're showing and attaching the letter to say, this is what we want to add to the docket. Can we add it to the docket? Basically, they're not kind of asking permission to file a letter to him, because like clearly they're filing this letter, and then do you need permission for this letter and the permission for the permission letter, like so on. It gets crazy, right? What they're saying is like, hey, this is outside the normal process. Can we add this letter, to the docket, basically? And then they're providing the letter to show that it's appropriate and what's going to be in it, and that way the judge can then make a determination on whether the letter should be included. Does that make sense? Rather than just like what Freeman did, which is like add the letter and then it gets struck because it's completely inappropriate, right? Freeman was doing that because he's adding a letter and just filing a general letter. It wasn't really attached to anything. This is directly attaching to the motion to compel and being part of that conversation, if that makes sense. I think, again, lawyers, let me know if I'm wrong on that one. Jugfrom says he admits hot comment, admits she complained. Yeah, and then claims he was blindsided. He's not allowed to be blindsided. That right there was sexual harassment. Yeah, and again, it doesn't matter if like their argument is we did the returns to protection, we agreed to them, and there were no further instances, so clearly she was cool. She was cool is not protection, not from an employer, right? For an employer, there's a much greater liability. And again, anybody in people management knows this because we get trained on it and talked about it. And it's also something that I am very mindful about in terms of wanting to create like part of me as a people manager. I create very inclusive, very welcoming environments. And so anytime there's any sort of like discomfort, or I wasn't cool with that comment, or that made me feel a little weird, that is something I always fully dig into, fully deal with, and make sure is resolved in a way that everybody's happy with. Because I want to create good environments, but it also helps them with legal liability for the company. Many employers offer informal harassment and offer continual training annually. Bellmoon, I believe they don't just offer it, like they have to do it. Especially, I think people managers have to go through that training. And I think most places, most states have laws saying that the employees have to go through harassment training and have to have completed it, and that employers have to track who's gone through it as well. So like, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Master Jinx says, and the May 29th meeting and the June 1st meeting. Yeah. And the February wait comment meeting and the May 25th text message exchange. I mean, like, it just goes on where he apologizes. Like, I mean, yeah, it's the May 25th. Yeah. The May 26th. Sorry to hear. If you feel up to it. I know this week was a lot, committed to making run things smoother in the board, right? Like, I mean, like his apology here on May 30th, made aware of your concerns, and I hear you. They're fully received and adjustments will be made imminently. Bad deal, bad text message, because this acknowledges receipt of those concerns and that adjustments will be made. In terms of liability as an employer, what were those adjustments? Were they tracked, and who was on follow-up to make sure those metrics were tracked and those adjustments were made? Nobody was, because the whole problem of this power dynamic is that Baldoni is director, producer, founder of the studio, so nobody was above Baldoni and making sure that got followed up. Okay, so next, this is the big thing that we're all like, we're all going on. It has been exhausting these past couple of weeks, because it has been motion to compel, motion to compel, motion to compel, to drag information out of this lawsuit, not just to help Lively support her case, but also to find information from Wayfarer about their case. So, last week we had the whole subpoena against Venable, and, this claim that Blake Lively had extorted Taylor Swift. She had got her lawyer to talk to, sorry, I was going to say her lawyer to talk to her lawyer. That's not clear at all. Lively's lawyer got leave to talk to Taylor Swift's lawyer, Baldrige. I think that's right. I might be wrong. I'm going to have to bring up the thing. That sounds right, but I need to go bring that up just in case. Yeah, it is Baldrige. Okay. Her lawyer, Baldrige, to say, hey, you need to put out a statement of public support, or Blake Lively will release 10 years of text messages between the two of you. And Friedman, last week gave us his affidavit saying that he absolutely swears that he got involved in a conversation about that. This is his affidavit, right? He says, during the February 14th phone call, which lasted approximately an hour, the speaker told me they had been informed by Douglas Baldridge. So Baldridge told somebody who told Freeman that he'd got a phone call from Michael Gottlieb. Gottlieb requested on Lively's behalf that Taylor Swift make a social media statement in support of Lively, given her absence for the Super Bowl, and if that Swift failed to do so, Lively would release 10 years of private text with Miss Swift. The individual also told me that they had been informed Mr. Baldridge that accused Gottlieb of extortion and ended the call. Now, we know that social media statement never happened, but that release of the text messages also never happened, so this is yet again Lively being the absolute worst at extortion. But it was a big deal. Kind of came out last week, and this got dropped. Where is it in here? On the 15th. The original claim got dropped on the 14th of May. What we learned this week is the reason why that got dropped. So, let me go. I think I might have to just bring this up. Yeah, that's Wayfarer's response to the sanctions. Let me go 1 second. I thought I was more organized than this. This is where we're going. This is what we're doing this week. we're a little out of it. I've got them in here. I'm in the wrong folder. I mean, this is wild. I know I've had so much coffee this morning and I'm still not prepped. So I apologize. You deserve better than this. Okay. Lively filed motions for sanctions against a number of the Wayfarer parties. So what we learned is, motion to file letter. Ugh, I'll get there. Is this the right one? Steve Sarowitz letter. Yes. What we learned is that in April 23rd, Lively's lawyers sent Brian Friedman and a number of the Wayfarer parties a letter warning them that if they did not withdraw their claims and their complaint against Blake Lively, they would be filing for Rule 11 sanctions. They argue that this is part of, we talked before about the group pleading issue, that Wayfarer have alleged a number of different claims. Extortion, interference with economic advantage, interference with a contract, WME contract, defamation, false light, all of this stuff, right? And all of the Wayfarer parties have alleged those claims against all of the Lively parties, right? So they're coming back and saying, look, you have no business making these claims, right? This is not just the group pleading issue that, maybe Sarowitz had, some claim against civil extortion or defamation, and then piecemeal it out and sort out that. They're saying, look, you don't have grounds for any of these claims. So they point out in here, look, the extortion claim would be against Wayfarer, Heath, and Baldoni. And that your case is that, they asked them to make this public statement or the gloves would come off. But that doesn't involve you at all. Your implied covenant, the covenant, which was the contract between Wayfarer and WME and Baldoni and WME, also does not impact Sarowitz. You have no valid legal claim to make here. So they're not just arguing that the group pleading is an issue. They're saying, look, you knowingly, and in particular, your lawyer knowingly, filed this complaint, filed these claims against Blake Lively, knowing you had no legal grounds to make these claims. There's no grounds for you for asking the court for relief on these claims. So they're frivolous. And that means that you are liable for Rule 11 sanctions because you have not met the requirement to plead valid, truthful claims. So this is a big deal. They then go on to say the real purpose of you filing claims was to increase harassment and cost of litigation. And they bring up all of Friedman's claims in the public media. They also talk about his statement about selling tickets to her deposition at Madison Square Gardens. Like, they're going hard. And they say, look, you have 21 days to either withdraw your complaint or amend it so that you correct your claims, or we'll file for sanctions. And this was done, this point, I think 4 weeks ago, on April 23rd. 21 days would be May 14th, which is when Friedman suddenly remembers that for 2 months, he's been sitting on evidence that Lively's lawyer is corrupt, extorting witnesses, and is guilty of major crimes that he just remembered 2 months later. So now it comes out that like now we know why Friedman would drop this bomb and was doing this was because he knew that this was incoming. So Wayfarer responded to this, to the sanctions, and they kind of just blew it off. They said, look, Lively defendants threatened sanctions against Jamie Heath on the grounds that Heath lacks standing to assert an intentional interference with the claim because the FAC does not allege that he's a party to the alleged interfered WME contract, right? And they say, look, this is just group pleading. This isn't Rule 11. This is group pleading. But it's not. There's no fix that they could put in that Sarowitz could argue defamation. They kind of reached out to that Noah Pennington principle. I think this is what that was, where if you defame a group, you defame all members of a group, if that individual is identifiable with that group. But this is the opposite. They're alleging that they defamed Baldoni, and they're trying to claim damages against all of Wayfarer because of defamation against Baldoni, and that's not the case. Steve Sarowitz especially isn't injured by defaming Baldoni. So they're arguing instead that, well, no, this is just the group pleading, and we could fix this. Group pleading is a common practice, and they're saying, look, we'll just fix this if the court grants the motions to dismiss, we'll then amend and fix it, right? So they're saying, look, this is just a major problem and flaw of our complaint. We're not going to fix it now. We're going to wait to see if the court tells us we need to fix it, and then we'll fix it. They also then go on to say that, look, discovery is in its infancy, and the extensive allegations in the FAC support the Wayfarer plaintiffs' good faith belief that reasonable investigation and discovery will uncover additional evidence to support the claims of the plaintiffs. They're trying to argue we don't need evidence of defamation against Steve Sarowitz because we fully expect that discovery will then produce evidence that you defamed Sarowitz. So we don't need to allege that or provide any evidence for that ahead of time. That's what discovery is for. They've done this a number of times now, and they did it in their responses to the motion to dismiss that, well, we don't have evidence, but we expect discovery will come up to and show us this. So Lively has now filed for sanctions based off this because that time period is expired. And they argue that this is just you trying to undermine and harass Mr. Friedman and our firm, rather than any legitimate complaint for sanctions. So let's go to it. At this point, I don't know what tab. This is my life. 8 million tabs open. 3 of them are playing music. I don't know where anything is. Welcome to my world. So Lively has filed the motion for sanctions. We're going to open it again in a new tab. I'm just going to close all these tabs in a second. We'll start again. To say, hey, look, this is some BS. She argues, look, the vast majority of them have no reasonable basis in law, or clearly these claims were brought for an improper purpose to try and harass. As to an improper purpose, the FAC was filed principally as a vehicle to seed harassing media narratives against Lively is obvious. The examples are legion. From its meaningless Exhibit A timeline of recent events, right, to the council's ghoulish taunt that Lively should testify about her degrading experience of sexual harassment at Madison Square Garden. All right, the FAC's legal and factual basis, there is none. The Rule 11 plaintiffs, and in particular, when we talk about the Rule 11 plaintiffs, we're talking about, I should probably clarify that, Steve Sarowitz, Jamie Heath, Melissa Nathan, Jennifer Abel. It ends with us movie because they have no grounds for any real legal complaint against any of the actions that Lively said. Even if all of their complaint is true, these would be damages against Wayfarer, Baldoni only, not against anybody else. The FAC contains no facts that Lively made any extortive threats against them, deprives them of anything as a result. Heath Sarowitz, Nathan Abel, and it ends with this movie. Each sued Lively for interference with a contract, but that contract was between Baldoni and Wayfarer. They have no contract or economic relationship at all. They've also sued her for breach of covenant of good faith and fair dealing, but no facts that any of them were parties to the ACTA agreement that their claim is based on. They point out the real plaintiffs have had ample notice. They gave them 21 days. They have not withdrawn, fixed, or amended their complaint, and so now, therefore, they have liable. They bring up the point that the plaintiffs could have sought leave to amend their complaints after receiving multiple motions to dismiss and the safe harbor letters, but they expressly declined to do so, even though the court reminded them on April 11th they were on notice of the asserted flaws in the FSC and invited them to seek leave to amend. This is when Wayfarer had asked for permission to extension to produce, I think, or they'd asked for an extension, and the court turned around and said, "Nope. What you should be doing is getting on fixing your amended complaint." Oh, it was permission, I think, to amend. I don't remember. Yeah, they argued that they should have gone and fixed it, and they didn't. And then instead, the Rule 11 plaintiffs expressly declined the court's invitation to amend and have opted to wait and see how the court rules, then try and amend their pleadings for a good cause, a tactic that courts in this circuit heavily disfavor. The federal rules do not afford Rule 11 plaintiffs in the country the luxury of waiting and seeing what happens with patently baseless claims. It is their responsibility in the first instance not to file them, or when they are sure, to show them in clear terms why they are fatally flawed, to dismiss them, or to move to amend, not shift the burden to the court and sort it out for them. And that's essentially what they're arguing here. Much of this, I don't think there's much else in here. Oh, I forgot that piece. Where is it? And it's whopping, this is the other line I really liked, and it's whopping 224 pages. The FSC contains nothing connecting any of the Rule 11 plaintiffs to the claims against Lively. Like, ouch. I think we got everything else. So I mean, like, they're basically going through, and I think, like, it's a very long document to kind of argue most of all of this. That, look, they brought these claims, and they don't have any factual basis for most of the people in this. It's very much what was in the letter. They argue that the real purpose is just to harass and drag her name through the mud in the media. They bring up Brian Friedman's statements. They talk about the website that they were going to release the full text and email exchanges, which is interesting because, we'd really love the full text and email exchange between James Vituscka, and you are denying us that. So that would be a good start if that's what, Wayfarer want to do, talking about they were going to release all the text messages. That text message right there, where is that? So they go on to say that, but then they go on to say, look, you should impose sanctions on them, right? This is clearly an attorney signed their name to an action that was destined to fail based on the facts and exceeding precedent. There was no reasonable argument could advance. Sanctions are appropriate. So they're saying that, look, you need to not just penalize them, but like dismiss this, but you need to penalize them, which is why they're bringing this particular move for sanctions in the first place. They argued that they filed frivolous extortion, tortious interference, and implied covenant claims with an improper purpose, and did not withdraw them despite the safe harbor letters. They argue that, look, Friedman, Schuster, and their law firms are liable. They've signed their name to this, right? That they violated Rule 11. They knew that they had no grounds for bringing these, and so they should be sanctioned based off it. The plaintiffs should also be held jointly and severally liable with the plaintiffs' counsel because they also knew they didn't have any complaints and that these were brought for a harassing purpose. They talk about where are I? They argued that they want monetary sanctions against them. They need to be penalized. They talk about the fact that Sarowitz pledged to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Miss Lively and her family, and given that, these should be substantial financial penalties. They argue that it's additional sanctions, including penalty. They argue that their lawyers' fees to prepare all of this material and fight these claims also need to be, put onto Wayfarer and their plaintiffs and the Rule 11 plaintiffs. It should be paid for. And they put all this out. This is a big deal. This is bad. We talked before about the motions to dismiss. For them to have been as bad as they were, right, where Wayfarer just continued to say, well, it's not improperly pled, but if it is, we'll amend. And I think there's over 100 acceptances of, well, we can amend. Why haven't they? They never did. And we talked back in the motions to dismiss that for the motions to dismiss to be so compelling shows how weak their complaint is. The fact that this could even be filed, whether it succeeds or not, shows that like their complaint's really weak. And I think there's actually a reasonable chance of this succeeding. What makes it even worse is that, you know, they were warning that they were going to bring the sanctions. Friedman's stunt that he did last week with the Venable subpoena, and we'll get to that in a moment, because that continued this week, of pulling that out there and doing so entirely because the sanctions were incoming, only makes all of this worse. It only makes them look even worse, and especially with the motions to compel and the fact they're not handing over any discovery, even on the discovery that is the foundation of their case. That is the one conversation that they should be like, oh, happily have this. Here is the damning proof that you defamed my client. This is the conversation that is the base of our complaint that we have used in every version of our complaint. This conversation is the one we keep referring to. The Daily Mail, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mail. We keep talking about it. That is the one conversation that Wayfarer should feel confident handing over if their complaint is valid. And yet they still don't. And that tells you everything about how improper their entire complaint against Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Leslie Sloan is. John's Works is a separate issue. James Works is a separate, different issue. So they have filed this. From what I understand from people who are smarter than me and actually have knowledge in this, it's unlikely this will get any sort of verdict until at least after the motions to dismiss, and that this is wrapped up in a motion for summary judgment afterwards. But it's a smart move because the motion for summary judgment, as I understand it, and again, if I speak incorrectly here, I apologize. I know nothing. I'm reading between the lines of what other smarter people are saying, is that wouldn't necessarily include fees, and it wouldn't include like paying the attorney's fees. So filing this is a way of getting ahead of that to kind of say, hey, if that becomes where we're going and heading with this case, we've already put in place that, look, we want, you know, this fee, the attorney's fees, we want all of this, we want these punitive damages, we want these sanctions, we want all of this against them to just kind of pile on. So it's not necessarily that this is instantly going to get ruled on and the case is dismissed and everybody lives happily. This is more adding more weight to that scale if that decision eventually comes around. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, you know, this is going to instantly get ruled on, or like, what will happen? What will the judge say? Probably nothing for a while. This is just going to sit on the docket until those other later decisions are made, at least as I understand it. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know. Maybe Lyman just decides tomorrow, or Tuesday, I should say, right? Because I'm sure courts are off on Monday, but yeah, decides on Tuesday, hey, we're going here. But it's smart. Ryan Reynolds also jumped in and filed his own motion for sanctions based off the same thing. What was interesting about this, there's not much that's different about this. Obviously, Reynolds has the stronger case, right? Reynolds' only claim against him is the defamation. And for most of the people in here, Sarowitz, Nathan, Abel, Heath, and it ends with us, have no business bringing claims against him for any of the other claims by themselves, and they're certainly not for the defamation. They put in here, asserting claims for extortion, defamation, tortious interference that cannot and do not exist. They provided them an opportunity to save face, that they could withdraw, and they didn't. And so, you know, again, they're saying, look, we gave them the opportunity to amend or fix this. We gave them a heads up that this problem. They chose not to go for it. Reynolds is slightly different in that one of the things he does is his sanctions hammers hard their claim about we're going to find more information in discovery. They say that, look, their refusal to withdraw their baseless claims confirms the entirety of their claims rely upon a hope and a prayer that discovery will somehow transform their frivolous claims into non-frivolous one. But sue first, investigate later is the precise opposite of what Rule 11 requires. What Wayfarer are not allowed to do is to speculate, bring a claim to the court based on that speculation, and then hope that they find discovery to justify that speculation, right? That, like he says, they turn frivolous claims into non-frivolous ones. They have to bring something to the court with evidence on a reasonable basis. And that's what he's saying, look, they don't and they can't. bringing up the point that their own pleadings and arguments, the only contract or business relationship ostensibly interfered with was the one between Wayfarer Baldoni and William Morris Endeavor. So how can any of them lodge any sort of claim against Ryan Reynolds? He hammers home the discovery thing a bunch of times. And that's what's different about his. I think he has like 3 or 4 times he talks about the letter response claim that Rule 11 plaintiffs have a good faith belief that further discovery will uncover additional evidence, while failing to state what that evidence could possibly be or why this case would uniquely allow for frivolous claims to be brought on a groundless prospect that they could later be legitimized. Therefore, claimed that his safe harbor letter and this motion are premature. They goes on to hammer the fact that Reynolds' purported demand that Baldoni, Heath, and Wayfarer issue an apology is not itself in extortion and is subject to dismissal, but it has nothing to do with Sarowitz, Nathan Abel, or It Ends With Us movie, who sued him for extortion anyway. Confirming this, neither the Wayfarer party's exhaustive 168-page Exhibit A timeline nor their opposition to Reynolds' motion to dismiss assert any factual basis that any of them possess nor could ever reasonably possess a civil extortion claim against Reynolds. Both Lively and Reynolds include this quote from another, from case law, to say that no competent attorney could believe after reasonable inquiry that these allegations support the extortion claims brought by Sarowitz, Nathan Abel, or It Ends With Us, which is some serious shade. No competent attorney, but hey, maybe that's what we're saying about it. But it's a reasonable argument, right? If you know that your clients don't have a reasonable basis to make that claim, why so badly screw up your group pleading to try to do that? Now, could it be a harmless mistake or is it intentional, right? This is where the decision for this is going to come down to, is how much this feels like it was malicious and intentionally done. Brian Friedman's stunt last week with the Taylor Swift stuff just really cements the maliciousness of it all, and really kind of puts beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was done by honest mistake. And especially, again, with the complete obstructionism and the motion to compel. I think if they had filed this, after the motions to dismiss, a couple months ago or even a few weeks ago, this would not seem so strong. The reason this seems so strong is because of everything that they have done now on top of it. So I think it was really good timing for them to file this. They go on to say that, where are we? The big claim for their making defamation was that he told the New York Times a false and damning story, but they've never actually articulated any basis of alleging defamation, what he said, when, and to whom. In fact, the only claims they've made are the predator statements to WME, so none of the others can claim anything, really. And then, where is it? It's on here somewhere. I'm going to have to find it. Was this one? Well, any non-frivolous defamation claim against Reynolds would have included factual allegations as to what he told the New York Times, but no such allegations are to be found. So yeah, what is interesting about Reynolds, though, is that Reynolds' letters to everybody was actually filed the day earlier. So Reynolds was the first one to warn them of the Rule 11, or at least, Ezra Hudson sent emails on the 22nd to warn them of Rule 11 sanctions against Reynolds. But their 21 days would have then been May the 13th. So it would have been the Taylor Swift stuff happened the day after the 21 days was expired, at least for the Reynolds one. And then the next day they did the same for Blake Lively. So yeah, we will see what happens with that. While I clean up my tabs, let's go to chat. We're going to get to Scott Swift. Yes, we will get to Scott Swift. That's the next section that we're going to do. We're going to talk about the Venable subpoena. We're going to talk about Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift's father and Candace Owens and all of that good stuff. Bellman says he should have apologized as he allegedly did, but retaliated. Yeah, I mean, they should have just issued that public statement. That public statement was not a career ender, that mistakes were made during production. I would have maybe asked if we could modify it and been kind of we're really grateful that, we had Blake Lively to help us and ask for, give suggestions on how to improve the set. It was a learning experience for all of us as we transitioned from an independent studio to a major Hollywood studio. We admit that mistakes were made, and we apologize unreservedly for any harm or harassment that was due. And we're grateful for everybody who took this as an opportunity to give us feedback and criticism and help us to grow and, improve the working situation for everybody, right? Spin it as a win. Like, you've got PR people. Like, what is wrong with you? The thing about Scott Swift doesn't seem true. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. It's like Baldoni's been taken out of it, and the whole thing is Blake versus Taylor. Yeah, I mean, and that's deliberate. That's deliberate. We'll get to this. Stop exciting us, Wayfarer. That's blackmail. Yep. You said something mean about me to someone at some point, says Master Jinx. I'll find it when you send me all of your texts. $400, please. Yes, that's exactly how they have run their lawsuit. It is crazy to me. Dismiss me with that shit, says Moby Mom Kenobi. Oh, amazing. Imagine if you could sue anyone you thought was talking badly about you in private. If that was cool, if that was true, there's a lot of people on Reddit who would get really nervous about. I've got the screenshots. They love talking smack. How it started, total transparency, how it's going 0 pages of discovery. Yeah, and I did the meme with Cheems and Doge, where it's like when he's in the press, like, we're gonna reveal everything. When they ask for discovery, we're not giving you anything. And that's always, like, to me, I often talk about abuse dynamics and talk about it in that in that relationship, right? And this is where I started getting into all of this, was talking about how this is very similar to a lot of abuse dynamics. And that is one of them, right? Of promising complete transparency and then not doing so. That is always a huge red flag for me, because there was no reason for them to promise that. There was no reason that they ever needed to go to the press and say, we're going to give you everything. We're going to give you all of this stuff. Nobody had any expectation of that. This is a lawsuit, right? Nobody expects that you're going to hand over everything and do all of this stuff. It is that public proclamation. I am so clean. I will give you everything. And then immediately it was undermined when, the call logs were requested, and they're like, look, if we give you the call logs, it might reveal if he's been talking to 5 mistresses. You're like, what? How are you flip-flopping like this? Like, it's crazy to you. Hello, God, it's me. Sarah says, holla, good to have you. Welcome in. Welcome in. Transparent as Cardboard says, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yep. Millie Bella says, that's what I don't get. How can Friedman keep doing these things that seem, at least as a non-lawyer, to be freaking questionable and be fine? It's frowned upon, but otherwise legal and fine. I don't know. Like, when you look and dig into a lot of, like I said, the prior stuff with him and the Bravo stars, like, how is this man still practicing law? I don't know. It must be very, very difficult. Master Jinx says, judges have to give both sides the benefit of the doubt, maintain neutrality. It's an abuse of that, though, I think, in this case very much. Fuzz says, respectfully, is very hard to understand you sometimes because you're so fast. If you could slow down, that would be great. I apologize, Fuzz. I know sometimes I get very excited and talk way too fast. I will try and bring it down. I appreciate the criticism, or the feedback, I should say. Maybe criticism's too hard. I don't want to make it seem like you were going for me, but appreciate it. And if you have any other requests, definitely shout out. Okay. So next, let's talk about Scott Swift. Let's talk about the Venable subpoena. So the other news this week was that the Venable subpoena got dropped. The Daily Mail reported it and talked about how Taylor Swift is no longer in danger of being called in a witness because the subpoena has been withdrawn. Now, the Daily Mail story says, okay, an insider, we don't know who, it's unnamed anonymous source, said that Brian Freeman dropped the request for the subpoena, and the reason they're doing this is very simple. They got exactly what they were seeking. Sending a subpoena to Taylor, and Taylor's response has provided Baldoni's team with everything that they needed. Taylor stated that she was not involved at all, and this is in stark contrast to what Lively has said. Taylor's lack of involvement proves that Blake Lively lied about several very important details to the case. Furthermore, the court now has information that is documented to show that Blake Lively's attorney did, in fact, threaten to leak Taylor's private texts. And this is backed up by evidence. Taylor was always considered to be the smoking gun in this, and everyone is extremely pleased with the end results and the information it yielded. They got exactly what they were hoping for and much more. I think what's interesting about this is Lively spokesman also kind of spoke to the Daily Mail and gave a piece for it, but was directly attributed to Lively. They argue that they're pleased, that we squashed the efforts of this. And, what's also interesting is that when the subpoena came out, Taylor Swift's rep also talked to the press and said that she was never involved, didn't sat on the movie, she didn't do anything other than participate with, her involvement was licensing her song for the film. That was it. My Tears Ricochet. But she'd already given this as a press statement. So them talking about that her response, that they knew that she was not involved, they already had that from the press response. They didn't need the subpoena from that. They'd already talked about that. But the other thing that I think is interesting to me, we talked last week about Brian Freeman's got to be very, very careful about what he's doing here. He's making allegations about another attorney, and there are strict rules about attorneys disparaging other attorneys that impact your ability to practice law. It is not surprising to me that the statement given to the Daily Mail by Lively's team is directly attributed to her spokesman. The statement given by Taylor Swift's rep to them denying that she was ever involved and that she was not going to hand over anything is also to Taylor Swift's rep. But the person talking to the Daily Mail saying what a great win this was for Baldoni and all this stuff is anonymous. Brian Friedman has not wasted any opportunity to crow to the media about every decision, every incident, every event that has ever happened that is positive for Team Baldoni. He is all over the news. He's been on Megyn Kelly. He's been on TMZ. He is only too happy to take up space and talk about this. It is not surprising to me that in making the claim that they have concrete evidence that Gottlieb is corrupt, dirty, extorted, does not come from Baldoni's team, does not come from his PR person. It doesn't come from anybody connected to Justin Baldoni. It is an insider, somebody who cannot be held legally liable for what is said. It's not a surprise to me. This is very, very transparent as to what they're doing here. So anyway, they talked about this, but then almost immediately after, the Daily Mail, oh gosh, here we go. Got to go through this. Capture. I should have loaded this up beforehand. We'll go through one more step. And they then announced that they have the insider who leaked the information. And it is Taylor Swift's dad, Scott Swift. Now, it's important to note when they say that the leaker, they're not talking about the previous article. The previous article has a inside source who's telling them about what's going on. What they're claiming the leaker is the person who provided the information they were talking about to Brian Friedman. This information comes to us, again, from an anonymous source. But they say that, look, Scott Swift did not want his daughter to be dragged into this, gave up voluntarily the information as part of a deal that would include Baldoni's team withdrawing their subpoena for Taylor. He didn't want this alleged attempt to extort his daughter lightly and decided to take matters into his own hands by cooperating with Baldoni and Friedman in order to protect Swift from any further legal involvement. They just wanted her to get dismissed. They don't want her to be any part of this case, so he handed over this information. That's not true. So we're going to go to Venable's subpoena. I got to go back, I think, last week. So let's go to Venable's subpoena. What was the information that Baldoni and his team actually asked for? It was pretty extensive, if you remember. They asked for all communication between Baldridge and the Lively parties, all communications between you, including without limitation, Baldridge and the Lively parties and their counsel, all communications between Baldridge and Gottlieb. So they specifically asked for communications between a lawyer and everybody else. Scott Swift does not have access to that material. Not only that, but given that Baldridge was actively fighting that subpoena, it's not up to Scott Swift to be able to provide that information. Now, what could have happened is Scott Swift may have, and again, I know you're all going to jump at me and say, no, Scott never did this. Hypothetical, right? We always explore the counter arguments. Scott Swift could have provided other text messages or information about it. Maybe there's a communication between him and Taylor saying, it's BS that Gottlieb tried to extort you, right? Something like that. That's what he could have provided. He could not have provided this material. And if you remember, again, look at the affidavit from Friedman. He specifically states that there was a phone call between Gottlieb and Baldridge. Scott Swift absolutely does not have that phone call, right? And when Baldridge is filing a motion to quash and is not wanting that to be released, and he's arguing that it's privileged, they cannot provide that information and would be into trouble for it. So let's say then that Scott really did produce some other material that essentially gave Friedman and Baldoni the ammo they were looking for in proving the extortion claim. Taylor Swift is not out of this lawsuit. Scott Swift is not out of this lawsuit. They will be called as witnesses. That information will then go to Lively as well. Those conversations will go to her, and they will be deposed, right? They will be brought into this lawsuit. If they're claiming this, they're giving these text messages and bringing up, they're not done with this lawsuit. The only way that this is true, that they are no longer involved, is because there was no information. So yeah, they talk about that the inside source has revealed that it was Scott Swift. What they don't mention is who that source was, and that source was Candace frickin' Owens. Now, I don't know here, right? Like, maybe. But to believe that Candace Owens has the inside track on Taylor Swift and her camp, and that they're talking not just to Baldoni and Friedman, but to Candace Owens as well, is crazy to me. But what's also really just so strange about this whole story is, if this is really true that he didn't want, he didn't take this attempt to extort his daughter lightly and was really angry at Blake Lively and wanted to go after her, why is Taylor Swift's lawyers not going after her? Why is there this sense, this whole story, that a man needs to come in to protect a woman? You're dealing with Taylor Swift, right? One of the most powerful, incredibly small, intelligent. Look, I could go on for a while. I got a lot of appreciation for Taylor Swift. Women that on the planet, right? This idea that her dad needed to step in and needed to leak it to Brian Friedman, protector of women. I talked about this last week. This is wrapped up in male panel fantasy all over it. This does not sound like anything. If you're familiar with Taylor Swift and her camp and Tree, this doesn't sound like anything from them. This would have been handled by them. And if it was public, they would have said something, but that would have been how this would have been handled. It would not have been, I'm going to give it to my dad to leak to Baldoni. Again, this is a deranged power fantasy. But if it's not, here's the big damning piece. There's always this sense that when you go down this path, right, and a lot of people on this are going to be pro Blake Lively, right? This is why you're here. As much as we love to kind of go through and get some of that snark and crap on Baldoni a little bit, right? The reason we're here is because ultimately I think most people watching this and joining in are already kind of either sitting on the fence and want to see another side or believe Blake Lively. But if we believe their side, right, it's important that, you kind of examine these counterclaims and see if they hold up. There is definitely a part of, could we be wrong, right? Could we have got this completely wrong? And maybe, and it's worth exploring. And it's hard sometimes when you've invested this much time, you've read all of this stuff, you've made all of these social media points, you are team Lively, right? That moment of, crap, could we be wrong? Could we be wrong? And this is a big enough bombshell and a big enough story that, if true, right? This is the pinnacle of huge if true, right? So let's say it is. That means that Blake Lively's lawyer tried to extort a witness. That means that Taylor Swift's lawyer knew about this, failed to mandatorily report this. It means now that Brian Friedman has evidence of extortion and corruption by Blake Lively's lawyers and has not reported it, has not filed anything with the court around this, has not immediately put a motion to get Gottlieb dismissed from the case, which I believe is something to do because Brian Friedman has had this against him, right? Other lawyers in one of his other cases filed a motion to get him dismissed off the case because of a conflict of interest and because of his misconduct in that case. So I believe that this is something you can do. You can file a letter to the court and say, hey, their behavior is so bad they should not be allowed on this case. None of that's happened. It means that he is sitting on evidence of a crime that has huge implications, not just for the case that he's in, but for particular Blake Lively's lawyer Gottlieb to continue to practice law. Like I say, in a lot of these kind of industries where there is a board of ethics and a code of conduct and licensure, there's rules and regulations and a mandatory duty to report misconduct and unethical behavior if you see it. And Friedman is apparently throwing that away. Now, it is also something where if Friedman makes public claims about this and claims that Gottlieb is dirty and he has proof of extortion and all the rest of stuff, and this is something he's not telling the truth about, this is something that, unlike everything else he's gone to the press and said, oh, you know, we think she's lying, all this is something he can be held incredibly liable for and would impact Brian Friedman's own ability to practice law if he's lying. And yet he's not talking about it publicly. I can't tell you yes or no, right? But to me, the evidence doesn't add up. And I think that's what I would caution on this. But we'll see. Maybe this week is the week that he drops this and we all get proved wrong. I think what will happen is this whole incident will fall off, will never be mentioned again because there was no evidence. So that's what I think. But we'll see, right? I don't necessarily think you care to see the dismission for the motion to quash. I think I had it on here, but I will throw it up here just to prove it. Venable withdraws their motion to quash. They did reserve the right to bring the motion back again if they're subpoenaed again. And Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds also filed their withdrawal of the motion to quash. Same thing as well, right? So it's just moot. But like I say, Friedman saying it's because we got the evidence we needed. Well, if that's true, you have evidence of a crime and of major misconduct and malpractice by a lawyer. We should see something about that. That should be next, right? If that's the case, we'll see how this week goes. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. And if we're wrong, that will be an interesting week next week. All right, I'm going to jump to chat, and then, like I said, we're going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up with talking about the motions to dismiss, but I'm not really going to talk about the motions to dismiss. I'll explain when we get there. All right. The statement is so deliberate, so misleading. The Justin Baldoni side he's eating up. That was deliberate. I took it as we wanted to put the idea out there and muddy the waters again. It's so crazy to me, El, that, you know, on the one hand, you have Blake Lively's spokesperson, somebody, you know, tied to her saying this was a win for us. And then you have Baldoni's side saying this was a win for us. And of course, like, both sides are going to say, hey, we side with, you know, our quote unquote team, right? But Baldoni's side won't even say it. They're using anonymous sources. Like if it was such a win, why aren't they saying it with their whole front chest, right? Let's know who's saying it and who's legally responsible. Do not get on Taylor Swift's bad side. The voodoo is real. Yeah. And I mean, like we saw last week when Baldoni was getting lit up by the Swifties, but also like just Taylor Swift. Again, I talked about this last week. The woman who sued a man for $1 to prove a point, like, she's not capable of bringing a lawsuit against her, you know, a very close personal friend who tried to extort her. I don't know. It seems strange to me. Taylor destroyed Scooter a different way. The Dean Follow article does not mention Scott Swift at all, which is interesting. Yeah. Again, and it's something that I've noticed with the Daily Mail stuff. A lot of like their really kind of out there stuff they put as a Mail Plus exclusive. They put behind their paywall link. They're really, 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 really crazy stuff. And I think, yes, part of it is doing it as a money earner, but I also think they're partly doing that to make sure it doesn't go super viral and cause problems by making these wild claims. And again, everybody who's covered this and talking about Scott Swift is all citing Candace Owens. Nobody else has come up with anything. Nobody else has talked to the individual who's claiming this. And certainly nobody on Swift's camp is saying anything. So I don't know. This information was Scott saying he didn't want Taylor to be dragged in this lawsuit. Yeah, I mean, that could be it. My dad has all my texts too, ready to give them to others. He needs to protect me from Targaryens. Yeah, it's wild. Not only does he have all of your text, but he has all of your lawyers' texts and phone calls as well, just ready to give out. So I wouldn't trust Candace if she said the sky was blue. I would definitely be going to go get my eyes tested. If Candace almost told me the sky was blue, I'd be like, she's right. I'm gonna go get my eyes tested. But if not true, that means that Brian Friedman lied in an affidavit. The same rule applies, right? Says false. No, it doesn't mean that he lied. So this is something we talked about last week, and you need to be very careful of when we bring up the Friedman affidavit, right? Friedman wasn't saying that this is true. Friedman's affidavit is simply that he received a phone call and that somebody told him that they had been told that Baldridge was extorted by Gottlieb, right? So he comes down and says, on a phone call, like, the same individual told me that Baldridge had sent a written communication, and I declare that the foregoing is true. He's not putting his license to practice law behind any of these allegations. All he's saying is that somebody told him that they were told that this happened. So there's a number of ways that all of this could be false, and Friedman is still telling the truth here, right? That somebody called him to tell him this and that he was misled. Now, where the problem for this is, he's doing this based off somebody told me that they were told. He has a reasonable responsibility before kind of going to the court and investigating this and finding out and sending out subpoenas as to whether this is true or not, rather than just going immediately to filing subpoenas, right? So that would be this witness that he's talking to here on the phone, depositioning them, talking to them, finding out what they know, how they know it, getting them under oath to talk about it, to say that they had got it. None of that has happened, right? So that whole chain of how this would normally proceed in order to make sure this was like going to be good enough to go to trial, been completely avoided. And again, I don't think that's coincidence, right? This is problematic that you're saying, hey, I got a phone call where somebody told me that somebody else told them about this, so now I'm going to subpoena all of their records. It's not a reasonable basis for you to go do that. So, and that would have probably come up in the motion to quash, that if he had brought up that the reason for the motion to quash is because he had a phone call that somebody told him that somebody else had had heard this, that would not have survived the motion to quash. So there's another issue with this and why it was probably withdrawn. Baldoni was the first to bring up Taylor in interviews. I don't know if he was the first to bring it up. I think the first mention, might have been Isabella Ferrer on the red carpet. I think that was the first mention, because one of the interviewers talks to her and says, you got the role because of Taylor Swift, right? And she says, yeah, we showed her, she'd seen my casting tape or something. And then the day after was the Access Hollywood interview, or it might have been, I think it was the Access Hollywood interview, where then Baldoni, August 7th, the Access Hollywood interview where he says, yeah, that Taylor Swift had done it. Actually, the premiere is the 6th. So yeah, so it would have been, I think it's Isabella first, then Baldoni, that way. In the affidavit, he only said someone told him, says Ida. As long as somebody did tell him this, he didn't technically lie. Yep. And it's always something to be very careful about looking at, right? Lawyers are very, 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 very good at using their words specifically. And I think a lot of us, because we're not legally trained, will read this and imply meaning that isn't there, but know that lawyers are very careful about their words. So read them specifically and only infer what the words state. Don't read in or add on, because there's a reason why they chose those specific words. Playing devil's advocate, I could see Blake Lively realizing that there wasn't a person to take charge of the project, director and producers lacking in leadership, and saw as an opportunity to be more involved and get her Barbie moment, as they like to say. But the text shows she encouraged her. She didn't really extort him. She saw her incompetence and stepped in, and they opened the door for it. Yeah, I mean, like, this is the, oh gosh, I forget. One of you can tell me, the interview where she talks about, I like to find a project I can, like, take more on and go for it, that was kind of twisted. I forget what the interview was, but that's what she talks about. I mean, like, and this was her, Khaleesi text to Baldoni as well, is that she often is involved in rewriting and putting her personal touches on a movie. And she really likes contributing to the project, right? Paul Feig talked about this as well for, the premiere of Another Simple Favor, that she had contributed and that she had been involved, and of course he loves that. He likes it to be a conversation with his talent and them to be involved. I think for Baldoni it just became, he's not used to that, he's used to running the show, and I think for him it undermined that sense of I'm doing something wrong. It wasn't collaborative, right? He saw it as criticism, if that makes sense. And I think that's why it was such a big problem. Is they saw it as her overstepping, even though it was completely within her bounds of what her contract was and that she was allowed to do, which Wayfarer themselves have accepted that she was allowed creative input in these things. They just didn't know how to set the boundaries of, no, this is Baldoni's show. You are welcome to offer suggestions, right? And I will, take them under advisement, but I get to make the final decisions, not the sort of collaborative environments she's used to, which is what she talks about in that Khaleesi message, where she's like, I have to be careful about how much I contribute because I have to deal with fragile egos, not realizing that she was talking to a fragile ego. Megan Magnan has talked to a source and got the same information as Candace. Yeah, I mean, possibly. I don't know who that is, but like, again, unless it comes from Taylor's camp, right? Like talking to a source, a quote source about this and saying that this lawyer is shady and committed extortion is meaningless until somebody's willing to put their name to it and face that legal repercussions for accusing a lawyer of extortion. It's meaningless, right? You can put anonymous sources all day. Baldoni is complaining that Lively did exactly what he asked her to do. I told her to make her own rewrites. Yes. Yeah. Forbes interviewed. Thank you, Massey Jinx. Thank you. She only wants to work with people who want to collaborate. Yep. Please explain your thoughts on the power dynamic between the victim and the perp. Blake Lively appears to have more power in this case. Okay. Yeah, I was going to kind of wrap up. All right, so we will get to this bit. I will do this last question and then we'll move on. But because I think this is an interesting question, and this is actually one that actually came up today because somebody tagged me on a TikTok video and I talked about this. So we'll do a little segue into talking about power dynamics because this has come up a lot in this whole discussion about abuse and sexual harassment, and Blake held all the power so she couldn't have been abused. First off, this is a fundamental misunderstanding, right? Subordinates can abuse, harass their bosses. The idea that doesn't happen because somebody has more power over you, that you cannot threaten, harass, coerce, or intimidate your boss, throw that out of the window. That is totally not true. The issue with the power dynamic on It Ends With Us was, who do you go to for help, right? If Blake Lively was harassing and extorting and doing all of these things to Justin Baldoni, right? Let's theoretically put it out there. Let's say all of his claims are true. Who could he go to for help? All right. So Baldoni's director, Wayfarer, right? He also owns Wayfarer, so he can't really go to Wayfarer, the studio, because it's the same thing, right? He can go to Sony. Sony has a massive multi-million-dollar investment into this movie. He can go to Sony. He can say, hey, we don't want this. We need your help. We need you to control the talent. We need you to let her know what's going on and step in and do this. Not only did that not happen, but when Sony did step in, Sony stepped in to help Blake Lively, right? Andy Giannetti was the one who called Wayfarer to tell them about Blake Lively's complaints. Andy Giannetti was present on set every single day after the November protections and after the January 4th meeting. And her role, being present every day, was to supervise safety on set. It's called out in the protections to production, right? She was not there to protect Baldoni. She wasn't there to look after and child mind Blake Lively and to control her ego. She was there to protect safety on set for everybody, which validates Lively's story. Second thing is, there are two separate occasions where Blake Lively says, I'm unhappy and I'm uncomfortable in this situation. The first is when Baldoni had made the weight comment and they call him to the penthouse and, Ryan Reynolds is there and berates him for fat shaming my wife and all of this stuff. And Blake Lively says to him, this is how I work. If you can't work that way, fire me and get somebody else. Baldoni had the power to replace her at any point in this movie. When the November productions for return to production are in there, again, Lively says, this is how you need to create a safe environment on set for me. And if you don't, I will walk. If you're not happy with this, if you don't want to agree to this, I will walk. You can find somebody else. They had at every opportunity the ability to recast, get rid of Blake Lively, and redo it. And then they even accept that in their own complaint. And they say that they don't do that because the cost would have been so much. You are now litigating multi-million-dollar lawsuit. $100 million, right, is what they're talking about, like they're investing in it. I don't know that it'll end up being that much, but it's fairly safe to say that this is a multi-million-dollar lawsuit at this point. It would have been cheaper at any of those stages to replace Blake Lively and to reshoot the 2-3 weeks of footage that they actually shot before November, right? They only shot about 3 weeks with Blake Lively. It's another point to bear in mind, right? That it was about 3-4 weeks. So at any point they could have done that, and they didn't. All the power rested with Justin Baldoni. Flip side, Blake Lively has these complaints. Who can she go to? So she's got complaints about the actor. She can't go to the director. It's the same man. She can't go to the studio because it's the same man. So who does she go to? She goes to Sony, right? What does Sony do? Sony steps in and starts arguing her case. They can share the complaints with them. Even when they're negotiating the return for production, they're telling Wayfarer that you need to accept this. You need to agree to these things. They bring in and sign on an additional executive producer, Todd Black, again, to supervise safety on set. So everything that we see from this complaint, just from the outside, without having to validate whether Justin Baldoni or Blake Lively's telling the truth, shows that the power rested with Justin Baldoni. And we see that now even in the complaints, right? As they're going through this legal battle, it is Justin Baldoni who is using his fans to harass, shut down any discussion of anybody who supports Blake Lively. The other members of the cast and crew on the set have had to close down their social media. They have to turn off their comments. And the people supporting Justin Baldoni are gloating about, look how successful we've been in, like, they have to turn off their comments. Blake Lively shows up at a bakery and there are review bombed and they get the health inspector called against them. She shows up to, another simple favor, and that is also review bombed. And every cast member that's involved in that is getting hate in their comments. I don't see how anybody looks at this and thinks that Blake Lively has all of the power in this at all. And especially when we see the actual effects of what is going on in this case. So I can understand it. I can see why people make that argument. I think the people that do don't fully understand abuse dynamics, personally. So a little bit of a long segue there. So, but I appreciate the question, Foz. It's a good question. Like I said, it's come up a couple of times. But yeah, that's where I land on that. You are welcome to disagree with me and argue that you think that all of the power rested with the woman who used her moment of power. And I think this is in the one of the complaints, who used her biggest moment of leverage, the return to production, to bring in additional protections for everybody, right? To bring in 2 extra supervisors on set for safety and to take control of the nude scenes of the younger version of her character. Like, those were the requests she made. She didn't say that she wanted all of this editorial control. She didn't say that she wanted him off the movie or any of these things. That was her biggest moment of leverage, and she used it for additional protections for everybody on set. That seems odd to me if you're making the argument that she had all the power. And we've also not seen a single threat or extortive claim from her either. So that's my other issue with the Baldoni side, is everywhere throughout his evidence, he shows us text messages he doesn't need to show us. The moment that he says, well, Blake Lively made this threat, there's no text message. There's not one. And as we've shown, a number of his claims, things like having his a film buy credit taken off all of the promotional material, was incorrect. We've got evidence that shows that was the case. His claim that she wouldn't allow any of the promotional material to go out with his acting credit on the title alongside hers, also not true. So there's a lot there that makes me doubt it. But like I say, the power dynamic is not really there, just because you have an A-list actor on set who's saying, hey, I want these changes. But that's not what power dynamic is about. All right, she can have power without having all the power, I guess, is the way that I'm saying that. All right, chat got real quiet on me. We got serious and deep for a moment, and chat was like, ruh-roh. Okay, so the motions to dismiss, like I said, I'm not necessarily going to go deep into these. If I have them, I thought I had them. Able amended complaint. Yeah, able opposition motion to dismiss. This is it, right? File 522. Yeah. All right, so I am going to quickly go through this. I have learned some stuff this week. Master Jinx says directors have power, studios have power. Yep. Blake Lively did not have all of the power. She had a lot of power, right? Being the A-list actor on set, and you can quibble with me about whether you want to call her an A-list or B-list or be really mean and call her D-list, whatever you want to say. But she was the leading star of that movie, and she had a lot of power there. She did not have all of the power. So the motion to dismiss, I mean, it doesn't really deal with Jonesworks' motion to dismiss at all. It really flips it round again and just says, no, we did. So if we remember going through this, her amended counterclaims basically I've moved now to claiming that there was, computer fraud, wiretapping by accessing the communications on her phone. Jonesworks came back and said, look, we did a digital extraction of the device, so you haven't shown us where we've actually accessed any of your information, especially your cloud accounts, so, you haven't properly pled this. Abel's motion to dismiss is basically, yes, we totally did. Like I say, I'm not going to go through because most of the stuff we've done 3 or 4 times now. Right? But the big piece about this is that, she talked about, look, there were no document restrictions or advisories concerning the integration of personal account storage of data and the expectation of privacy in return on storage company device. In the absence of such policies, Abel had no reason to believe her personal data would be subject to access or review by Jonesworks because she used the device for both personal and work matters. Jonesworks was fully aware by virtue of this arrangement that Abel's digital information would be commingled with the work data on a device it owned. Jonesworks assured Abel multiple times during the final week it had no problem releasing her phone number and her personal data. So, I mean, this is not really the case just because there's no policies or put about it. There's no expectation of privacy on your device. The case law they end up citing actually works against them. I might go into that. I don't know. We're kind of running along, so we'll see. So I don't necessarily think this is a valid argument, but I mean, hey, maybe it'll work for her, right? One of the big problems with this, though, is her own messages in the timeline. Is it this one? Yeah. So she's talking about, look, all of my personal and work information was commingled. So during this, and we'll talk about this a little later on August 14th, they're talking about her talking to, about these stories and Sony talking about Lively and praising her. Melissa Nathan talks to her and says, I think I need to use your personal email, or is there a Wayfarer one you can use? So there's already this idea in her Jonesworks communications that the communications that are personal are too sensitive, right? God knows what they were going to talk about, but we'll forget that for a second of what were they talking about that's so shady that needs her Wayfarer or personal email and can't be on her Jonesworks. But she already accepts that there are levels of communication that aren't involved on her Jonesworks device, Jonesworks accounts, that aren't tracked for it and on her text messages here. So she's already fully aware and understanding of there's this delineation. Arguing that because there was no privacy policy or device policy that disappears doesn't seem to work and kind of with her own words, basically. They also told her that, she comes in here to the office, she was told she was free to leave, that, she had to surrender her iPhone, turn over the passcode, was told her passcode was needed to facilitate the release of her phone number. She did not consent to a search of the device. It's a work-owned device. You do not get to consent. It does not matter. Sorry. And she says, because she was ambushed, she had no opportunity to wipe device or log out of her personal accounts. Again, the problem with this is that Abel's own text messages dispute this, right? So we know from Jonesworks that gosh, did I get the wrong page? Oh my gosh, I got the wrong page. I'm gonna have to find it. But we know from her conversations in the Jonesworks one in here. Yeah, here we go. This text messages, right? So She knew on the 21st that she was getting hauled into the office to be dismissed. She says, I'm having my offboarding meeting this morning with our chief of staff, a joke, because Steph won't face me. And you should see the list of things I made. I made a list of things to bring up. I need the list. Holding them hostage. It's wild. Exactly how business should be done. She had pre-warning about this meeting. She knew that this was her offboarding, and she knew that the phone was a company device. You do not get to walk out of that meeting stealing company property, as JonesWorks' motion to dismiss had mentioned. So this idea that she didn't have forewarning and wasn't able to log out of her device or protect her personal data, she did. She had plenty of knowledge and forewarning of it. She chose not to. That does not make JonesWorks liable for her mismanagement of her private data. Sorry. So then they go on to say, well, look, because her accounts were logged in and active on the device, JonesWorks is able to monitor, access, and retrieve her private communications without her consent and without encountering any technical barriers. Able was unable to prevent JonesWorks from accessing, copying, disclosing any of this personal data. Again, this is data at rest on the device. It does not count under the wiretapping laws. They kind of come back to bringing up the sham Van Zam subpoena and lawsuit in here again to say, well, you know, this is how she created this, you know, veneer to get it. And then that she was able to issue a subpoena on JonesWorks and extract them for Venable's cloud and email accounts, but that's not true. The information was extracted digitally from the device, not the cloud accounts. That information was copied to the device was through no fault of JonesWorks. So that doesn't seem to be the case. But again, we'll see, right? Like this is dealing with some pretty technical issues with cloud computing that are at like the edge of what is there in law. They try to argue the wiretapping, and that is much more settled law. I think we're going to, where is it, page 16? That's where we kind of come into it here. They talk about that, you know, Able alleges that she accessed her communication stored on servers owned by Apple and Google, but JonesWorks says she extracted the device digitally from what's on the device. So those are inconsistent. And Abel's challenge here doesn't work unless she can prove the cloud-based accounts have worked. She brings up this Schwartz versus ADP case. I did look at that, right? I'm not a lawyer, but I did dig into little pieces of this. But that was quite different in that, you know, they were actively monitoring and looking at his personal information. But also they failed to claim the wiretapping claim that that Abel's claiming entirely because, you know, it was not simultaneous transmission. It was after the fact, reading it on the device, which is, again, like they're using case law here, which might serve this claim here about the SCA, Stored Communications Act, but it undermines their wiretapping because that same case said, no, this is not wiretapping because those emails and stuff are at rest on the device. You're not instantaneously getting them. She brings up this case law for the wiretapping and brings up a different case, which is this one, where somebody intentionally set up a email forwarding, right, to intercept and transmit wire. And they're saying that, well, that's the same as her account being logged in twice. I don't think that's going to uphold, but we'll see. Not a liar, right? But that's really it. So there's not really a ton in here. That was really what I was going to talk about. Oh, the privacy claim. There was one piece she brings up in the privacy claim that she does have a right to privacy. And they bring up this case here. They're saying that courts have recognized employees do retain privacy interests in personal information stored on employee devices, and they bring up this case versus Venable Communications. That case was somebody who prepared sensitive legal material on a work device, deleted it because they knew it was a work device and it was going to be monitored, right? And when they returned the device, they deleted the information. The employer then used data recovery techniques to undelete that information, and then, you know, create a lawsuit against them based off the documents that they had prepared on a work device. The courts argued that, look, that person had already taken every reasonable step to protect their privacy. That's not the case in Abel's case, where she was logged in for months on her personal accounts. So again, I don't think their case law that they're citing is compelling, but not a liar. Maybe it is. Maybe there's different pieces that I am missing. So yeah. Wayfarer also brought up theirs. I am not going to go through Wayfarer's opposition to the motion to dismiss at all. Nope, wrong one. Oh, yeah, opposition to motion. Where is the Wayfarer opposition to motion to dismiss? Oh, I maybe didn't get it. Oh, you're gonna have to bear with me one moment. I will go to chat while we just go get the Wayfarer motion to dismiss. Why could she steal the movie anyway, says Obi-Wan Kenobi? They have no idea where they performed in the box office. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that's never really kind of figured out. She stole the movie by giving Baldoni all of the credit for the movie and all the money for the movie and the rights for the sequel. I'm not sure what exactly Blake Lively got out of it in terms of stealing this movie. So yeah, it's a little strange to me that that they're making that claim. What else we got? Kim says their fans are saying that Hudson cites the wrong case was also another example of getting ahead of things. Yeah, they said that because Wayfarer say it, right? Wayfarer say it, and they're like, oh, Hudson's citing the wrong cases. And they're like, sure, but that's an argument for the court to decide. And of course you're going to say that. You're not going to write something to the court saying my opposition counsel is providing fantastic arguments. And that's really why you should just throw our case out of court. That is, they are stunningly educated on this, and we apologize for wasting everybody's time. That is not something that they're going to say. It might be, but it seems unlikely. Kim says she was gloating about having a page way to get away around the blocks that put on her account. Yep, that's also pretty damning. You know, when you talk about, hey, I've been blocked and I have 100 different emails to get around it. Hello, God, it's me says if you use work devices for anything, you have no ownership over it anymore. Again, like you do certainly, there's some pieces of privilege, and like that case that we just talked about there, the brought up where you're preparing material. You can prepare privileged material on a work device and it doesn't remove the privilege. And that was the other piece of that, right? Where she was specifically preparing material in ahead of litigation. So it was protected by work product and attorney-client privilege. So them undeleting it also didn't remove that privilege was the point, right? That she had taken every reasonable expectation to protect her private data, but also there was privilege there for those documents that still applied, which does not apply to any of Abel's information here. All right. Oh, God, it's me, Sarah. If I were JB, I would hope to God that Abel is just lying about this, my personal information argument, because I would be scared if she actually believed that. Yeah. All right, it says maybe she didn't know she could log out remotely. Well, she does. She does log out remotely in January, right? She changes her password and knows that she could do it. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's well. All right, so like I said, I do want to finish up by talking about the Wayfarer opposition to motion to dismiss, but I'm not really going to talk about it because it's mostly the same argument. Again, they don't really deal with Jonesworks arguments about what the information is that's confidential. They just say it is, which is interesting. But I think I did want to talk about, I forget if it's either page 10 in this or page 10 in my actual thing. Okay. So they talk about the story, and we've, the introductions and the legal background, the factual backgrounds. We've been through this story so many times, right? It feels a lot like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, where he's like, all right, one more time. So there's this radioactive spider, right? It feels a lot like this, right? So there was this smear campaign, and there was this phone that was handed over, and there's all these text messages. We're going to do it one more time. Abel informs Jones that she's going to start leaving her own company. Jonesworks abruptly terminates her. On the same day, Lively's publicist Leslie Sloan called Wayfarer's confidentially retained crisis management consultant Melissa Nathan. They argued this on August the 21st, right? This is not confidential on August the 21st. I don't know why this is in here. Because a huge part of the thing with Melissa Nathan was that this gets revealed on August the 13th. Right? There's the huge Hollywood Reporter article about Justin Baldoni hires crisis PR veteran. Don't worry about this August 8th. This is because they included this text message. It's not related to this, so don't get confused. It's August 13th here, the Hollywood Reporter. This is just a mistake in their timeline. Incidentally, we've talked about this before, but this screenshot doesn't appear anywhere else in any of their complaints. And it also doesn't appear to be the same conversation either. So I don't know where this fits in, but anyway, getting sidetracked. They already knew about Melissa Nathan on August the 13th. Also, do you remember the whole Daily Mail thing? Where, like, on August the 8th, where there's the whole, fallout from the Daily Mail article and Jones planting the story. And what does Melissa Nathan do? She says she's going to call Leslie Sloan and leaves a message for her saying, like, to give me a call. So how is it confidential that Sloan calls Nathan when it's already public information as of August the 13th? And Nathan had already called and told Sloan that she was working with Baldoni on August the 8th. Like, this stood out to me because I was like, how is she confidentially retained? In what world? But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is on this next page, because this is something that I kind of mentioned briefly the last time we talked about this, but they've reiterated this phrase that, Jones was told to stand down and she wasn't, and that Jones should have known from the numerous texts and emails that her statements that the Wayfarer had created a smear campaign were absolutely false, because by August, Wayfarer was scarcely engaging with the press. And so that is what we're going to wrap up with and spend the next couple of minutes talking about. Is I want to destroy that argument. Firstly, it is absolutely crazy to me that Wayfarer, at the premiere of their largest film to date, are arguing that, days before this film is released to the public, they have their big premiere, they have all of these events, he's talking to all this press, that they are scarcely engaging with the press. The only PR who is scarcely engaging with the press at the premiere of your movie is a bad PR. It's so crazy to me that they are trying to argue this, that Jones Works should have known that they weren't hiring a smear campaign because they weren't talking to the press. Yeah, not only is that not true, but we're going to go through that. We're going to spend the next couple of minutes, and I'm going to go through every time Wayfarer talked to the press in August. So buckle up. Carmentary and Tory Lanez and Baldoni are two sides of the same coin. Oh, I mean, that and Diddy. I mean, like, there's a reason why, like, all of this gets lumped into, ultimately the conversations about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, because yes, this is consistently always the same stuff. All right. So I'm just going to go through the text messages. These are a combination of everything that is in the complaints. I should have pulled them up in the complaints, I guess. But I'm pulling them in this. I'm just doing screenshots. So they're from the complaints. They are. You trust me at this point. If you really need me to prove this, drop a comment as you're watching this and say, can you give me the places where this is? Most of them are from the timeline. I will say 90% of the screenshots you're about to see from the timeline. The other places they are from Lively's complaint and from Jones Works' complaint. So that should answer your questions about, well, where did you get this screenshot? That's where. Okay. So let's start with August the 4th. August the 4th, Melissa Nathan says, I have already spoken off the records to the editor, Daily Mail, because she's my friend. I've been having a thought about this. I deeply suspect that this is I've forgotten her name now. Lillian Gisson. I strongly suspect that this is Lillian Gisson. Lillian gets promoted to editor of the female section of Daily Mail in January, which is around when, like, Melissa Nathan's bragging about having a friend at the Daily Mail that she's that Abel is mentioning she has a friend at the Daily Mail who's been around for a while. It could be different people, but I believe that this editor of the Daily Mail is Lillian Gisson, I think. Might be wrong on that one, but I think that's where this will get shaken out. But we'll see. We shall see. So August the 4th, they're talking to the Daily Mail. Okay, so that's one day down. Next. They include this text message of the infamous text message where Justin Baldoni is talking about, gosh, potato quality, right? You got to love it. Of Hailey Bieber, right? Where he's like, this is what we would need. This whole Twitter thread that is like, here's a history of Hailey Bieber's history of bullying, right? This is what we would need. What's more interesting about this, in terms of the conversation we're about to have, is this is August the 5th. Celebrity kind. Baldoni says she wants to interview me, and Jennifer says, "Do you want me to have me email her?" So they're already talking on August the 5th to Celebrity Kind, which is another blogging interview area for doing interviews with him. He does end up doing that interview, and I'll prove that in a little minute. August the 7th. Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan once again talking, and Melissa Nathan says, "From my friend at TMZ." Justin Baldoni tips hitting her email about his beef with Blake and Colleen Hoover. We talked about this in like the first couple of episodes. I think episode 1 and 3 of Reading the Receipts, about the smear campaign and all of that good stuff. So we talked extensively about these messages, but I bring this up to just say again, so August 7th, Melissa Nathan is getting tips from TMZ, actively talking to her and talking back to them. And she said, I asked, that was my follow-up question. She was talking to the press on August the 7th. August the 7th is also when Baldoni does all of his press, right? So for the movie. So August 7th is when he talks to Access Hollywood, CBS Morning, and the Today Show, right? This is the day where he decides to wear his No More pin. It's also the day they decide to greenlight the smear campaign and go after Blake Lively. So yeah, all of this, right? August the 7th is also when the Celebrity Kind interview happens. The interview gets published on August the 10th, you can see here. But in the beginning of it, she says, the 40-year-old actor is finishing up a day of press as headlines emerge about a rift with the cast members. So this was August the 7th because it was the day after the premiere, August the 6th. And this is when everybody's speculating, why was Justin seen separately from the rest of the cast of the premiere? So this is August the 7th is when that interview happens. So we know that he was talking to Celebrity Kind on August the 7th. Would Lillian have to give up her sources at trial? I think Lillian's messages are probably going to come into trial because she reached out. And funnily enough, that's where we're going next. August the 8th is when Lillian Gisson reaches out to them. She talks here. The Daily Mail stuff. Oh, I guess should have done this one first. This is the email from Lillian Gisson talking about working on a story about the feud. Lillian Gisson writes the Daily Mail article talking about the speculation after the premiere. Stephanie Jones says that she left word for her. Of course, we know now that that's not true. She got a missed phone call from somebody. She thought it was Lillian. It was somebody else. And then in their discussion about all of this, when we talk about this, this is where Jennifer Abel says, Steph chimed into that Daily Mail article and then screenshot it and sent it to Jamie and Tara and was like, I know her, I will handle, and she will kill it. Jamie told her to stand down because you're handling, to Melissa Nathan. So we know that Melissa Nathan was tasked with talking to the Daily Mail on August the 8th. August the 8th is also when the Independent reaches out to talk to them, talking about the feud and the issues that are going on. Through this whole drama with Jones and the Daily Mail, August the 8th is also when Melissa Nathan includes screenshots of her talking to Sarah. She says there that, on her potato text, you'll have to believe me, it says, my sister is calling me furious. I'm trying to calm her down. And then she shows screenshots of her conversation with Sarah Nathan. So we know she was talking to the New York Post on August the 8th. August the 9th. We know that from Jones' works that Jennifer Abel was talking to Katie at Business Insider, Katie Warren, I believe, at Business Insider, working on an article about Stephanie Jones. We know that on August the 9th here, she's talking about, should I try to get Justin's letter removed? I need to tell her on background, and that she was continuing to work with her on the Business Insider article. Fuzz says, Blake Lively's description of alleged harassment during the dancing scene wasn't as described per the video was released. Yes, it was. It was almost exactly it. If anything, it was Baldoni's who's completely lied about it. He'd mentioned that Lively the only reason he talked about it smells good was because Lively had invited her to talk about the smell by, she was saying like she was worried about the smell. That phrase is not found in the video at all. Baldoni lied. I encourage you, I think I've got one of the videos where we go through it. I think I've got a video on my TikTok, actually, where I cover specifically the dancing video and I go through. Baldoni's account of the events and Lively's account of the events versus the actual scenes from the dancing video. And consistently, Baldoni is the one who misinterprets and claims the scenes are different. You know, he talks about Lively bringing up his nose and making fun of him, but it's Baldoni who invites that by bringing it up and making the comment first. He doesn't mention any of this. So, like, there's a lot of this where when you look at what the actual scene was, it's not how it's presented in Baldoni's complaint, which is weird because Baldoni had the video. I don't know if Lively still had the video, maybe not. I don't think she probably still has access to the dailies to be able to grab that. So Lively was doing it from recollection and was more accurate than Baldoni's, even though he had the video. So it seems very much like he was intentionally trying to misrepresent that scene and argue that Lively was overstepping boundaries that he never did. He said, for instance, talked about how like Lively was constantly talking through the film and that they'd asked her to be quiet. None of that is in the scene at all that is shown. There's not one request for her to be quiet. The video confirms Blake's claim. Yep. I mean, there's very few people who watch that video and don't see her obvious discomfort as he's all up in her neck and don't immediately viscerally react with like, yep, been there, know that. Like it's clear. And so, yeah. But you know, well, this will come out. I think it's going to be more important, the stuff that's not on the camera that they talk about, that he claims that it's still recorded. And in particular, she claims that after that scene was filmed, she talked to him specifically to say that she felt uncomfortable and whether there's any corroborating witnesses to that. If there is to that corroborating witnesses to that conversation afterwards, it does not matter what the video shows. If she's expressly had a conversation with him afterwards to say, you did this and it made me uncomfortable, it's still the case. It also, I think the bigger picture as well about the dance video, sorry to get sidetracked, the bigger picture about the dance video as well is that it confirmed what Lively had said about improvisation of intimate scenes without any intimacy coordinator. Baldoni had claimed that that wasn't true and that the script said, well, you know, like there's this montage of scenes where they're being intimate, but none of that describes the specific actions that Baldoni did. And at no point in the scenes that we saw did Baldoni ask for permission or say, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to nuzzle your neck, I'm going to kiss your neck, or do any of that. He just did it, and she's expected to be comfortable with it, which completely justifies her claim that these scenes were not scripted correctly. There was no consent asked for, and that he was completely improvising intimacy from take to take. So like all of those claims were validated by Lively's complaint by his video. And I think that's what kind of gets missed in this whole thing of like, when you focus on, well, Blake Lively's a bitch who lied. It's like, okay, like you're always going to focus on these pieces. Zoom out a little, and is the complaint actually true? Was there an intimacy coordinator present? There was not. Were these scenes scripted with regards to intimacy? They were not. Could you as an actor reasonably know in performing the scene what was about to happen or what you were expected to do? No, you could not. So all of these things show a completely unsafe work environment that was not conducive to the level of professionalism that should be there when you are performing intimacy with somebody. And I don't care that they're like, well, she's an actress and like she's playing the love interest. Like, been there, done acting, right? It's not okay. And I would never dream of putting somebody else in that position. I would absolutely, before we did the scene, block it out. Hey, I'm going to do this. And then I'm thinking I might do this and I'm going to do this. Cool. Great. There's no surprises. There was none of that in the dance scene that we saw. It was all just hope and a prayer, wing it, and you're just cool with me doing this stuff, right? It's a very bro attitude, which is wild for somebody who's a feminist like Baldoni or alleged, right? Like it's crazy. That's not professional, but it's certainly not at that level of this is what an ally who thinks about creating a safe work environment would think about at all. So yeah, it just says romantic montage and slow dancing. Romantic doesn't mean intimate touching, kissing. Yeah, I mean, if you can't describe the scene, there's no way for you to consent. And Fuzz, no, absolutely. Look, all right, a lot of the questions are kind of like you're pushing back and doing these things. I absolutely encourage it, right? I'm not afraid or like I don't get upset by somebody challenge. And if you have a different viewpoint, right, if you think that Baldoni's more convincing, absolutely ask those questions, right? I don't necessarily think I'm going to change your mind, but I can at least explain what my thought process is as to why I don't agree with you. And maybe that can bridge the gap, right? Maybe that can be helpful to you in understanding of like, oh, okay, he's not delusional. I can see the roadmap of why he believes what he believes. And that's why I will call that out, right? Whether you agree with me ultimately at the end, again, like, I think we've all got our biases and stuff that we bring to this, but I think it's important to have those conversations and to have them respectfully, where you're like, hey, I don't agree with you. I do find these pieces of information convincing. Can you speak to that? Can you speak to why you don't? Because yeah, always happy to ask those questions. And I know that maybe bringing up those questions in a chat and in an environment that isn't maybe necessarily friendly, right? You might feel like, oh gosh, I'm the only person who disagrees. It's all the more reason that we should be welcoming up those questions and understanding of like, hey, please ask us questions, challenge us, and let's deal with them respectfully. So thanks for being here, fellas, and asking those questions. Seriously. So Business Insider, we're going to carry on. August 9th is also when they then get the email inquiry from James Vituscka, right? And start talking to James Vituscka, or I shouldn't say start because we don't know when. August 9th is also then when, Abel talks about, the article that James Vituscka puts out, and she says, I don't think it's that bad. It looks like a plant from Blake's camp trying to steer the narrative. And she says, well, I mean, as if like that was her intent. She says, I can tell you've done a lot of work. Nothing about unsafe fat comments. So we have proof here that she was actively working with Vituscka to shape and change that story. So it wasn't just like, talking to her. And also August the 9th then is when, they call out in their timeline that Heath calls Jones to clarify that due to the sensitive situation, feels more comfortable with Abel leading communications. But again, why would that be necessary if they weren't really talking to anybody? Clearly, not only are they actively talking to press, but Heath feels it's so important and critical right now that he's very clear about he wants particular individuals shaping those communications. So it's not just that Wayfarer are talking to the press. He feels it's a very critical and important time to take a very proactive role in directing how those communications happen. August the 9th, Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan talking again. Melissa Nathan talks about on with my sister now, but, behind needs to be taken out of her article and mostly the misogynistic. She then talks about, again, that article saying, I knew she would keep uncomfortable when they're sharing the story from page 6. So again, she's talking to the New York Post on August the 9th. They then talk about even more people. I think talking about them. Please follow me back on IG and don't message me. Yeah. This is where then Melissa Nathan says specifically, I cannot talk to any more journalists today, August the 9th. This is the period when, according to Wayfarer, scarcely engaging with the press. Meanwhile, Melissa Nathan says, I can't talk to any more journalists today. Like, it's so wild to me that they put out the timeline and they continually undermine their own argument with their own evidence. Yeah, so she says, you did amazing work of the 2 articles, again referring to that Daily Mail and New York Post article. August the 9th, Baldoni does Good Morning America, again wearing his No More pin. It's the last time you will ever see him wearing it. August the 10th, we're talking to People magazine. She talks here, Majority Socials, talks about LA, where are we? Yeah, so it says People magazine messaged me that then they messaged me again to say that they're getting radio silence and everything. So they're actively talking with People magazine. They also talk about other people reaching out to them that they're not necessarily talking to. So Roger Friedman from Showbiz, Caroline from ET, Gillian. I think that might mean Lillian, but instead of Gillian. And then, Katie, which is their internal digital team, our tag said limited pickup of those 2 pieces. Again, referring to the Daily Mail and New York Post. So again, talking to more people. August the 12th, Business Insider, again, talking, hey, can you give me a call back? I have a quick question, Katie Warren. And then the story goes up on the 15th, and Katie again calls and says, hey, thanks, or texts her to say thanks for your help with the article. So we know that they were working on the Business Insider article throughout August the 13th. Abel and Nathan are talking about a completely unsolicited story from TMZ. Blake has a huge ego. Justin Baldoni was liked by many cast and crew, and this is her ego being bruised. Jen jokes that the Post has a similar tip, but not from any of us, obviously. And Melissa says, totally not from us. Now, and then Melissa says, the reporter told me her rep is working overtime. Now, I take this, right, because I take a negative view of them. I take this as them basically confessing that they're the ones planting the tips. And I talked about this again in those early videos about the social media campaign and the smear campaign, that the way that this happens is Melissa, Nathan, Jennifer Abel post anonymous tips with the news sources. They then reach out for them for information on background, which they give them to help shape the stories while maintaining plausible deniability that they are not planting stories. That is how it appears, the mechanics of all of this work. But even if you take them, right, that they're being deadly serious and they're saying, hey, not from us, we're totally not doing this, and they're being serious here, it still shows that they are in touch with both TMZ and the New York Post because they're telling them about their tips. So they are still, even if they're not planting their stories, this is still a confession that they are actively working with those news outlets and they're being fed information back and forth. Again, this is when they're supposedly scarcely talking to news outlets. August 13th, again, the New York Post contacts Nathan for a comment regarding cuts and feuds on set. This is Sarah Nathan. They're hiding the fact that it's, again, Nathan's sister, Sarah, who's talking to her at page 6. They talk here in the exchange here, and, you know, Nathan actually says, hey, I'm on a Zoom call, but call Sarah and go through, or do you need me to do it as well? She has the opportunity to give us comment. And she's basically telling Abel to go through and shape that story. So again, like they're talking to her. August the 14th. I mean, we're not even halfway through the month yet. TMZ calls about the 3 HR complaints, which, you know, Melissa, Nathan, the tag team go back and say, hey, there were no HR complaints. We don't know what you're talking about. We talked about the August 15th, the Business Insider. There's a second Business Insider article, highly critical of Jones, which again, Jones claims that they had worked with that. We don't know that for definite, so this one's a maybe, but Business Insider are at least talking to Nathan and Abel again still. This is a screenshot from August the 16th, where Nathan is talking to somebody at TMZ about the Kirsty Flahr article that the Daily Mail put out. TMZ are joking about it, saying, oh yeah, we interviewed her too, let me find her, you know, and then Nathan's like asking, why am I being mentioned in this and all of this stuff. But it shows that she's having just regular conversations with TMZ, not even about planting stories or about any of this. She's actually planting stories with TMZ and sharing them, making sure that they see all of the negative articles about Blake Lively. So again, scarcely talking to the media, but she's actively daily conversing with them and feeding them stories. We don't know who this reporter is. Again, this is from August the 16th. You can see there. But this is Melissa Nathan complaining about the Daily Mail article, saying that it looks like us. And she shares a screenshot with Jennifer Abel of a conversation she's having with, quote, a reporter. We just don't know who it is. And she says that you know, Nathan says to the reporter, damn, this is unfair because it's also not me. Everything looks like it's me, maybe not to you. And she says, no, it totally does look like Baldoni's side is planting these articles, right? But that's a conversation that she forwards to Abel from a conversation she's having with the reporter that, you know, they're not doing. So yeah, so that's everything that I've got. And this is just up to the 16th, right? So, I mean, like that's almost like 30 points of contact, in just over half a month, where they're like, we are scarcely talking to the media, but they did constantly nothing but. So it seems really strange to me that they put this in here when it's so easy to try and show that they have so many touch points with the press. But it also makes it very difficult for them to argue that they weren't actively participating in a smear campaign. And it shows that their defense here is pretty weak. There's ways to talk about it, right? You would openly show all your conversations and show that you weren't planting these negative stories. But as we saw with the James Vituscka stuff, they're actively hiding those conversations. So yeah, I don't know. We will see. But that was the piece that stuck out to me, the motion to dismiss. I'll probably end up writing this up as a Reddit thread to kind of cover all of this, to show all of these touch points, because I think it's important to kind of counteract this narrative that they were scarcely engaging with the press. It is easy to dismiss. So that was everything from this week. So congratulations, you made it through. We're almost at 3 hours. I'm going to wrap up with some chat, and then yeah, I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. So appreciate you being here with me. Like I say, I will probably cover the Wallace motion to dismiss next week. Just hold off for a little bit for that. And then hopefully Things are a little quiet this week. It'd be nice. Master Jinx says, signing onto a movie about domestic violence doesn't give blanket consent for the director and co to do whatever he wants. Yep. Agreed. Even if it's just a romance movie, says Ellie, let alone a movie with such sensitive subject matter. Yeah, and I think that's what always guts me about this is, again, putting myself in these shoes, right? If I was a director and I was making this movie, I would, have domestic violence consults on hand. I would probably have a therapist on hand on the set, just in case anybody felt triggered about it. Because again, dealing with a subject matter like this, a lot of people have personal experiences, not just the cast of the movie, but also many of the crew. And it might be uncomfortable to deal with and do this. And so, I think it would be important to have counselors and people on hand to do it and talk about it. And he didn't have any of that. And that makes me immediately suspicious, especially, like I say, given his platform, because I know, for me at least, like that would be a major consideration about like, how do we make sure this is a safe environment and safe set from the beginning? And yeah, sure, it'll cost money to add, an intimacy coordinator on set all the time, but they didn't want to do that. It would cost money to have a therapist on time, on the whole movie all the time, but they didn't do that. And again, like when we talk about the money, we're only talking about 2 months, right? In total to shoot time. I guess it's a little longer when you think about when Blake Lively wasn't there in the show with the rest of the cast, right? So what, 3 months total? 3 months total to bring somebody in and consult. It's not a huge amount of money when you're talking about a multi-million-dollar film, but it does feel like they kind of cut some corners. Hello, God, it's me, Sarah says, even if Blake was uncomfortable over nothing, she brought up a concern and he dismissed it until he to bring up Sony. Yeah, and it's not just he dismissed it. It's like the way that they do it. It's just so gross. And I think like the June 1st is like the really egregious one, where he says, she brought a set of grievances she appear to have spent the past 5 days over analyzing. It was clear she had scrutinized every minor interaction and perceived slight from the previous week. How dripping in disdain and dismissive is this, right? Again, the leading emotion should be curiosity. If you don't feel you've done something wrong and somebody's coming to you with these complaints and they're just constantly complaining and so curiosity, like, where's this coming from? And again, as a people manager, right, often it's not what they're complaining about. There's something else underlying it, but that curiosity helps you to break down and get to what's the real answer. Very few people come to work wanting to be an absolute jerk and make everybody's life miserable. But the prevailing narrative here from Baldoni's side is that just who Blake Lively is, despite the fact that clearly she has made multiple movies without that being the case. And, obviously we saw from Another Simple Favor, adored by her cast and her crew and working on that movie. None of what he's saying here is true. But he has to create this narrative that she's just really difficult to work with. She's mean, she's spiteful, she's hateful. And this is who she has always been, permanently 24/7 every day of her life. Very few people are like that. And I think feeding into a narrative that people are like that is really dangerous because it's incredibly dehumanizing from the outset. Again, all undermines Baldoni's position as like this ally, because all of this language is just intrinsically antithetical to everything of his platform. Faz says, that's why I asked and made observations, because you said you're welcome. Yeah, always. Did I see the letter to Lively from the investigators and your thoughts on this? I know Blake was concerned about the neutrality of it. Yeah, I think we talked at the beginning of this about the investigation, and I don't fault her lawyers for not wanting to participate and talk with it. I think in a situation where you have a quote unquote impartial investigation that is being funded by one party, that has the legal counsel from one party involved, and that all of the materials being produced are controlled only by that party, yeah, that's not impartial. It's not impartial. It's not neutral. It is very clearly, I think, as Lively described, a fact-finding mission for Wayfarer. And I think the other piece of that really kind of makes it coercive is the fact that they're mostly only talking to Wayfarer employees who are going to be leveraged and compelled into participating, right? Because they can do, because they're employees, and they can argue it's part of their employee contract or part of their duties. That to me is really concerning, and especially given that their quote unquote counsel will probably be Brian Friedman, right? Wayfarer is not going to pay for additional counsel to be present and pay for another lawyer who's going to stand up to Brian Friedman, because that would be adversarial to Wayfarer's interests. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the investigation counsel is paying for multiple counsel and everybody who participates in those interviews. Brian Friedman's there to represent Wayfarer, and there are other lawyers who are there to present the best interests of those witnesses. That does not seem to be the case. They argue that only Brian Friedman is present, and that is a huge conflict of interest when they have ongoing litigation, because Brian Friedman's there to serve Wayfarer's interests, not the participants, not the Wayfarer employees. So, like, again, if it was me and I was asked to participate in that investigation, that would be a hell no. I would be getting my own legal representation and being part of that. And that's a problem, right? Not everybody can afford it. I'm not even sure like we afford it, but you know, you would find a way to make it work. But like that to me is the bigger problem, is that Wayfarer is not providing independent counsel for the Wayfarer employees, right? It's Brian Friedman, and that is problematic. One lawyer was saying that texts appear to have been edited on both sides. If texts have appeared to have been edited on both sides, I'd love to see them. And nobody has been able in 6 months to show a single text message from Blake Lively that has been edited, doctored, or manipulated. The only example we have ever been given is the missing emoji from one text message, and that is because of a feature of the forensic extraction tool that is used to pull those out. If you have a screenshot of that text message that's been edited or manipulated by her, happy to deal with it. But like I say, the only ones I've seen and noticed in going through myself have been that Justin Baldoni's texts have been doctored. And it's a bigger problem because he's only presenting screenshots. He's not presenting those digital extractions from Celebrite or another tool. He's only presenting screenshots, which shows that those devices have not been forensically attached. They've just been like sharing screenshots of a text message, which is intrinsically like more problematic because you don't have date stamps. You don't know that they're come through and all the rest of the stuff. What I wonder is who greenlit the timeline. Don't know, but I'm eternally thankful for them. So I'm hoping it's Brian Friedman. And if so, thank you so much for providing us with so much evidence that you're lying. All right. This timeline doc syncs everything they try to claim. Yep. Gina Richardson, I missed it all. You did. But the great news is you'll get to watch it all over again. And so I'll get to keep you company for the next 3 hours as you replay this. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us this week. Like I said, we'll do this again. I mean, like, let's face it, it's probably going to be next week, right? With everything going on, there's probably going to be a lot more happening this week. So yeah, we will go through. And I think we are also going to get, by the end of next week, right, Vituscka's response to his motion to compel. So at least we'll have that to talk about. And then Jed Wallach's, Blake Lively's motion to dismiss against Jed Wallace, which is now, I think, like over 1,000 pages with all of its exhibits. There's not a ton new in there, but I think it's worth going over the claims about defamation through silence because that was entertaining. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you hanging out. If you like what we're doing, as always, like, share, comment, help boost this so that other people get to see it. And I will see you all next week. Sincerely appreciate the amount of time that you dedicate to hanging out with me as we go through and cover this. And like I say, hopefully this next week we have a little quieter week. That would be nice. And then we look out for whether Blake Lively has to get new lawyers, right? That will be the big talking point next week, or whether this just all disappears and forgotten about. That'll be interesting. Okay, chat, take care. Have yourselves a great rest of your day. Have yourselves a great weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye.